everybody. And I know we're still trying to work out some of the logistics because we have such fantastic turnout. Everyone wants to talk about Foundation Aid. And so our room is not quite big enough. So please forgive us as we try to work it all out. And thank you very much to Senator May and for hosting us here. My name is Shelley Mayer. Today is Tuesday, October 29th. I represent the 37th Senate District, which goes from the Bronx border in Yonkers to Bedford in northeastern Westchester. I'm here today together with my colleagues in the Senate who will each introduce themselves as chair of the Senate Education Committee as part of a series of roundtables on the Foundation Aid formula. We've already held 2 roundtables, one in the Hudson Valley, one in Buffalo. We have this one. We will be in Long Island, we will be in Queens, and we're having a public hearing in New York City, all before the end of the year. At today's roundtable, seated at the table are representatives from many of the stakeholders in both central New York and around the capital region that we've included in today's roundtable. Our goal is to hear regional stakeholder input regarding the components of the Foundation Aid formula in relation to student, district, and community needs with the goal of achieving greater equity in school financing. We're joined by a number of our Senate colleagues, as I mentioned, Senator Rachel May, Senator John Liu, Chair of the Committee on New York City Education, which is a subcommittee of the Committee on Education, my ranking member, Senator Betty Little, Senator Pam Helming, and we're waiting for Senator Robert Antonacci as well. They'll each get a chance to give some opening remarks. I want to particularly thank our regents who have been participants in these roundtables today. Beverly Odekirk, thank you so much for making sure you have the chance as well to come and hear the stakeholders and their views. By way of background, in 2007-2008, the New York State Legislature adopted the Foundation Aid formula, which is codified in New York State Education Law, Section 3602. It was passed as a response to the decision of the Court of Appeals in Campaign for Fiscal Equity versus New York, which affirmed the right to a sound basic education under the New York State Constitution and established that the previous distribution of state aid constituted a violation of that right. The provisions of the formula, which we are discussing today, attempted to determine the needs of each particular school district with a complex set of factors weighed together to determine the amount of Foundation Aid per pupil owed to each school district in the state. The original plan was for a 4-year phase-in of the formula, which was cut short by the Great Recession. Currently, $3.4 billion remains to be phased in for 398 school districts under the existing law. Today we are focusing specifically on the factors used in the formula with the goal to solicit up-to-date factors that more accurately reflect the changes in our state over the past 12 years and changes in particular districts with unique needs. So to that end, we will be discussing specific elements of the formula, not a generalized discussion of the issue of the state's funding of public schools. We all support significantly additional funding for our state public schools. That is a given at this conversation. The format will be as follows. We'll ask our fellow senators to give brief opening statements. Then we will ask each invited participant to give no more than 1 minute. I would say in some of our roundtables, the 1 minute wasn't adhered to. Introduction of themselves and their perspective on the existing provisions. What are the top issues for you in talking about Foundation Aid? After all the participants have done so, we will be posing specific questions for discussion with the goal to hear from a variety of views about whether and how to improve the law to appropriately measure student need and move to a more equitable formula. We are also interested in your views about other factors of student need in your own district that may not be accurately represented in the formula, the impact of regional costs, and the impact of cuts in your district over the past several years. We appreciate that there are both participants and listeners here today. We ask that comments be limited to invited participants. Of course, everyone is free to submit a comment in writing to us at an email address I will give you in my office with Georgia Asciutto, the committee director. or to appear at our public hearing on December 3rd in New York City, or to submit written comments for that hearing. On a personal note, it's really a pleasure to be here in Syracuse. I want to thank Senator May for helping us arrange this roundtable, and I so appreciate the degree of interest that you all show in coming here to talk about this most important topic. We, all my colleagues in the Senate on both sides of the aisle are committed to the students that we serve and that you serve. This is all about the children of our state. They are the most important thing to us, and we are going to work our hardest collectively to ensure that they get what they need. So with that, I'll turn it over to Senator.
Thank you. I want to thank Senator Mayer for bringing this roundtable to the 53rd Senate District and to welcome all of you here. I know we have, I think, 6 of the school districts in our 53rd district, but a lot of you are from outside the district, and so welcome. I want you to know it's always beautiful like this in Syracuse. Come anytime. So just a few days ago, I got the report from the Alliance for Quality Education that showed that the Syracuse City School District is able to allocate in per pupil spending about $12,000 less per pupil than the average of the most affluent 100 districts in the state. And there are some other smaller districts where the gap is even larger. So we have a real problem in terms of equitable funding of education in this state. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are so many people here in this room, around this table, and the interest in this is so strong. So I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. We have, I think, a long way to go in terms of thinking about the foundation aid formula and also just in general how we fund education. Senator Mayer held a really informative hearing in Albany during the session that was really digging into the question of other ways to fund education besides using property taxes, which I think feeds a lot of inequities in our system. So I'm very proud to be part of a conference in the Senate that is really grappling with a lot of these very difficult but wide-ranging issues that could make an enormous difference to the children of this state. So I'm grateful to all of you for the work you do for our kids and our schools and our communities, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Thank you. I neglected, and it's on me, to mention that Senator Brian Benjamin, who's not here, and that's why I forgot, is chair of the Senate Committee on Revenues. And he is doing this jointly with the Committee on Education because we understand that we may need to find additional revenue at the same time that we try to distribute the existing revenue more fairly. Both pieces of it are in the equation. So I want to acknowledge him. Senator Little, and then we'll go to Senator Wu.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Mayer. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see such a good crowd. I'm looking forward to what we can discuss and talk about today. So I represent the 45th Senate District, which is Warren, Washington, Essex, Clinton, Franklin, and parts of St. Lawrence County. And I have Don Carlista here from the Saranac Lake Teachers Association. I believe he's the only one from my district, if I missed anyone else.
So I get everyone's time that would have been here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator.
Give you my time too. So this is important, and we're all very, very hopeful that we can do something about the foundation aid and certainly fund the schools. I'm a former teacher, mother of 6 children, grandmother of 18, so I know how important education is. So thank you.
I'm going to grab this on the way because I forgot to acknowledge my staff who've worked really hard for this, particularly Zach Zeliff, who has done a huge amount of work. And as you can tell, it was sort of a moving target. We secured this room before we realized exactly how great the interest was going to be. So I'm grateful to all of you for being willing to squeeze in here. But I want to thank Zach and Eric and Jessica and just my whole staff, which has worked really hard for this. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator May, and thank you for once again for hosting us in beautiful Syracuse. Look, no one's happy about foundation aid. I mean, I'd love to hear from someone in this room who's ecstatic about foundation A and just wants to keep it exactly the way it is. Having said that, everybody wants to change foundation A in one way or another, and it is not going to be easy changing the formula in a way that's going to make everybody happy. So but nonetheless, we have to confront it head on, which is precisely why our Madam Chairperson, Senator Mayer, has convened these roundtables. She's tackling the issue head on. I look forward to working with her, alongside her, and all of you to see what we can do to better improve education funding throughout the state of New York. I also am proud to serve on Senator Benjamin's Committee on Revenue and Budget, as well as the Finance Committee, and so these are all issues. None of them are in isolation from one another. They are all intertwined, but before we can go any further, we really need to understand what's on the ground. So if you can give specific examples or criteria about what factors you think are not working for your school districts, or what other factors should be added, as Senator Mayer mentioned, that would be ultimately helpful to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Pam Helming. I represent the 54th Senate District. That includes all or parts of 6 counties, starting over on the western side, Monroe County, Wayne County, Ontario County, Hugo County, Seneca County, and Tompkins County. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to represent that large geographical area. My district includes 26 school districts, so it's very large, very broad, and very diverse. I really want to start out by thanking you, Senator Mayer, for your leadership on this issue, and for your personal interest in providing fair and equitable education funding to students all across the state of New York. Senator Mayer worked with me and with superintendents from my district to ensure that they, I was going to say receive their fair share of funding, but they're going to disagree with that, but at least you moved the needle in the right direction. They got more funding than they have in past years, so I want to thank you again for your passion and your leadership. It's great to see so many representatives here from my 54th Senate District, and if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce them just because there are so many who are not at the table today. I have Auburn School Superintendent Jeff Perizzulo, Gananda School Superintendent Sean Van Scoy, Seneca Falls School Superintendent Jeremy Klingerman, Newark School Superintendent Matt Cook, and from the Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES we have Superintendent Vicki Ramos, and from the coordinator for our 4 county school boards, Marla Iverson, is here today. I want to thank you all very much for being here today, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to travel here. Your input is critical, so thank you. I also want to make special mention of the students from Auburn, and I know we have one student representative who is at the table today. What you may not have seen was just before this event started, Senator Mayer and myself went out and joined, maybe 50, 60 students from the Auburn School District who came out here and delivered thousands of petitions calling on the state to do more to fix and fund their school district appropriately. So thank you to the students who showed up, and to the student representative. I hope you'll take that message back to your colleagues. Thank you. We all know that the method for determining and distributing public school funding is flawed. It doesn't provide balance to our schools throughout the state, oftentimes shortchanging our more rural school communities. Every district, as we all know, is very unique. As I said, I represent 26 public school districts. This includes several very small schools as well as several large. Some of my schools have graduating classes of 40 and others are in the hundreds. But one thing, regardless of the size or the location of all of these schools, they're negatively impacted by our current budgeting process. And I'm really looking forward to learning more through this process and to working with my colleagues to figure out a way to fix this and to provide more equitable funding across the state. Thank you.
And again, we are trying to make sure that anyone who wants to listen in has a seat, so just bear with us as we move chairs here, and we'll do the best we can. And it is a sign of how much interest there is. So, going back to my 1-minute rule, really, there is plenty of opportunity. We have 4 hours scheduled here, so I'm just asking that you briefly introduce yourself, a very brief summary of your issues on foundation aid, or your passion about this issue, and then pass it along, and then we will open it up to a robust conversation about the specifics in the form. So we're going to start with Beverly Oderkirk, 4th Judicial District, New York State Board of Regents.
Thank you, Shelley. I am formerly from the Weedsport, Jordanelle, Bridgeport, Byron area. I am now up in the North Country, 11 counties, 100 school districts, 6 BOCES regions. It's a large territory, to say the least, so that multiplies our problems and issues. I'm the parent of 3 grown sons and 6 grandchildren and 1 great-granddaughter. I am here to listen, and I truly mean that. I'm co-chair of the State Aid Committee for the Board of Regents. I just spoke with Nan on the phone on the way down here. I was not driving, by the way. So I'm very anxious to hear the discussion today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelly Ward. I'm a community advocate with the Alliance for Communities Transforming Syracuse, and we're interested in public school and racial issues in the public school and socioeconomic issues. One of the things that I'm not sure the state is taking a look at, I'm sure you are, but is the shares agreement, knowing that 50% of the foundation aid does go to downstate, and 3 of the counties included in that are in the top 5 richest counties of the state. And it seems like upstate and Syracuse gets kind of short-shafted with that. And I also think that we need to look at our region a little bit as a county, because the schools are so segregated racially and socioeconomically, and instead of as individual districts, I would like to see maybe more countywide look at things. Thanks.
I'm Mark Potter, the superintendent in Liverpool. I've been there 7 years, been in the district for 13 years. Just as a context, prior to that I was at Altmar Parish, Williamstown for 24 years. So a context of a district, very rural, relatively small, population of about 1,500 students, and now a population of about 7,500 students. I think that Senator Liu had mentioned solutions. I don't know if there's anybody in this room that has solutions when there's such a diversity with the problem. And I just will mention, we have a significant changing demographic. Probably most people would agree with that. The number of students living in poverty has risen in Liverpool from about 18% to 45%. We also have a significant number of ENL students, and our population of students living or having students with disabilities and with IEP or 504 has climbed significantly, and we all are aware of mental health issues, etc. So I think when we prioritize what some of these issues are, the tax cap was put into place to provide, realistically, at least for me, some level of predictability for our local share of the levy. I think the issue is that we create budgets early on and then wait until April-ish to get an answer that doesn't really provide us with any level of opportunity to make changes or really create a budget in the best interest of our students.
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Malloy, the superintendent of Morrisville Eaton Central Schools. Morrisville has a student enrollment of just over 600 students. We're very small, rural, and some of the things that we're identifying as concerning for us is that when the formula was enacted in 2007-8, for one, it was never fully funded, but it's also the cost of educating students has some new variables that hadn't been considered or weren't considered at the time, I don't believe. And those variables include the cost of educating special ed students, ELLs, the cost of providing student supports with mental health and school safety. And one of the things that I think should be considered as districts are being provided with foundation aid increases or the funding that we need to educate kids, the small rural school districts in my region have been crushed by, as of late especially, is the probability of legal attacks in the region by attorneys who are looking to exploit the vulnerabilities of IDEA and the IDA and the associated New York State regulations. It's devastating, and I can tell you that almost all of the increase that we get is going to legal costs through this exploitation of the policy and the laws. Additionally, there's an artificial floor. The floor of the formula identifies that schools can only be so poor. The poorest schools can only be 65% as wealthy as an average district. Our district is poorer than what the floor is in the formula. So there's some concerns there, and there's some districts, small rural districts, much poorer than us that are affected even more than that. Lastly, I'd just like to emphasize the need for a concise, predictable, minimum amount of foundation aid that districts need in order to stay alive. I think everybody in here is looking for ways to keep their programs afloat. One of the analogies I'd like to leave you with is, I think the education system needs to be flooded with cash to get all the boats floating again. And then let's try to stabilize those boats and provide tweaks where we need to. But everybody needs that predictability with aid. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senators, and thank you for having us all here. I'm Larry Spring. I'm the Superintendent of Schools for the Schenectady City School District. My mission as Superintendent is to ensure that race, economics, and disability no longer serve as predictors for student achievement. That's an extraordinarily difficult mission to do in New York State, which, as we all know, is the most segregated school system in the country. My main issue that brings me here and makes me so passionate about this really has to do not so much with the technical aspects of foundation aid, and personally would just love to see us try it first. Go ahead and fund it, let's see if that works. But more so with the politicization of funding of schools, and the annual political process in determining the distribution of foundation aid has resulted in significant discrimination. Those small number of schools, school districts in New York State that serve predominantly black and brown children are dramatically underfunded according to the existing foundation formula. And I would encourage you, whatever it is that you do in trying to restructure the foundation aid formula, is not just tweak the formula, but ensure that that political process does not result in continued discrimination. Some folks know I filed a civil rights complaint with the federal government against the state of New York. That complaint is open, and it's there because those schools that serve predominantly black and brown children are 10 times as likely to receive less than 70% of their foundation aid compared to the school districts that serve predominantly white children.
Can you just open the mic over? I'm trying to restrain myself from responding as well. The mic is closed.
Hi, I'm Shannon Shine. I serve the students at the Rotterdam-Mohannesson Central School District outside of Albany, mid-sized rural district, a suburban district of about 2,800 students. I do hope, as Dr. Spring just alluded to, that the driving force with any changes, whether you're going to fully fund the formula or going to make tweaks, would revolve around equity. I know Senator Liu was saying, hey, everybody has things that they want to change. Your path forward, you're going to get some discrete and specific suggestions to tweak the formula. You're going to have other people say that you should fund the formula. I certainly agree with both. However, how do you do that in the political landscape that we find ourselves, such as with the A through J funding bans that seem fairly partisan in nature? The way forward is through equity. The foundation aid formula was well conceived and well designed, and it does lead to equitable outcomes. The district I represent has gone from the census figure for poverty in 2000, which the formula uses as one poverty measure, was 5%. We're at 45% free and reduced currently. So again, to give a specific suggestion for an improvement, if you went to the 2010 census, we generate about $200,000 more of aid. If you went to the 2017 SAPE figures, you generate another $200,000 worth of aid. And I'm I've laid off 20 people this past year, a little bit different in the Capital District, on top of 10 people before that, while burning to $1 million of fund balance. And part of the reason is that we're one of the most fiscally responsible districts in the region, having some of the lowest per pupil expenditures. And that's fine. Before the tax cap, you can go back to the taxpayers, but now they're increasingly impoverished. So I would encourage the committee to look at everything through a lens of equity. And again, if you return to some of the founding principles of the Foundation Aid formula, I think we'll be successful together.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us here today. My name is Sean Vanscoy. I'm the superintendent of the Gananda School District. I'm also the chair of the Wayne Finger Lakes Superintendent's Legislative Committee. As superintendent of the Gananda School District, I am here to address how the students' Foundation Aid formula is failing Gananda students specifically in our community. Denying our students access to services while creating a disproportionately high tax rate for our residents. The tax rate in Gananda is the 9th highest in New York State. Gananda is a small district of 950 students, 17 miles from Rochester, and 94% of our property assessments come from residents and homeowners. We have no businesses. The 950 students in Gananda are supported by homeowners with a tax rate of $31.69, which is again the 9th highest in New York State, but does not translate to higher per student spending. 73% of the districts in New York State spend more than we do. A higher tax burden is a result of the Foundation Aid formula's inability to address Gananda's need. Our frustration is that 60% of New York State's school districts receive more aid per student than us, while 90% of those districts also have more property wealth, and 60% have more income wealth in the district. The problem for us is that Foundation formula is weighted heavily towards extraordinary needs and classifies Gananda as average needs, and ignores our low wealth and our high tax rate for our homeowners. The Foundation Aid formula as it exists today does not allow for all of the factors that drive need for many districts and the students in those districts. It is frustrating to observe the continuing services and supports in nearby districts while we're not able to provide those in Gananda.
Can I just ask that you try, maybe don't use your whole statement?
Yep, almost done. Currently the formula is not being allowed to run. Some data points are being ignored, and the creation of tiers is manipulating that formula.
Thank you. I need people to run out of people.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Becerra, Superintendent in Canastota Central School District. I've been in Canastota just since July, so some of my concerns are relatively new in nature, but this is the 20th year I've spent as the school district administrator in the state. Some of our challenges in Canastota is a relatively small rural school district, about 1,300 students. We're coming off a year with substantial staffing reductions. We're also a target district, so we have substantial challenges in terms of performance that we're trying to address. So a lot of our concerns center around the predictability and sustainability of the budgets that we're working on. We're trying to put long-term plans in place. We're trying to put in practice that really takes coordination and time. We're certainly trying to be as efficient and responsible as we can with how we allocate funds. But the uncertainty of what we have to work with is a significant concern. As Mark alluded to earlier, certainly other factors that have impacted us are the increased special ed costs and classification, mental health issues for sure. Our ability to locally raise money has been significantly impacted, certainly by the tax cap and all the things swirling around that politically. And finally, I would say a couple of specific areas when we're talking about the funding formula itself. I would say certainly how poverty and how sparsity impacts the formula. I would ask that be looked at and considered. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Margaret Zare, Superintendent of Oneida City School District. It's my 4th year at Oneida and also my 20th year of being an administrator. Oneida is about 2,000 students with a free and reduced rate just over 50%. So we've climbed, just like almost every other school district over the past 6 years, 20 to 30 points in free and reduced. So our student need is continuing to grow. And particularly, we have a lot of students who are living in trauma and mental health issues in a small city school district. I thank you for listening to us. I know I've shared with Senator May some of our concerns within the district. One is that the foundation aid formula is constantly being manipulated in the second run. So what we anticipate in the governor's run is changed in the second run, and that's political in nature, and it hurts districts in our planning process over time. The second big consideration we'd like you to look at is the sparsity factor. We do not have a lot of miles within our district because we are a small city school district, similar to the Big Five. We just don't cover a lot of miles. We don't think there's a difference between urban poor and rural poor. I think if you don't have the money and you have mental health issues, those are the same regardless of where you live. And our needs serving those kids are the same as a district who has 500 students with lots of acreage to cover. One of the comparisons that we've shared with Senator May is a local district that is near ours, has 250 more square miles than us, the exact same free and reduced rate, the exact same number of students, but they receive $11 million more than we do, almost $12 million more than we do. In addition, their tax levy is $6.7 million less than ours. Not only do our students lose out on programming, but so do our taxpayers. We have people who are in neighboring districts call us and complain regularly about why our tax bill is higher than their tax bill. So that sparsity factor, I don't think that it should be part of the foundation aid, but transportation aid, absolutely. They have a lot of miles to cover that we don't have to cover. And the last thing is the inaccurate, out-of-date information. And you know that the poverty rate has changed dramatically within all of our districts. So again, I thank you for listening.
Can we go out of order because our student has to go back to school?
Absolutely.
And this is all about students in school, so.
We'll talk to her teacher.
Make sure someone writes her a pass.
I also want to say that this roundtable is being live streamed at City Hall Commons, a few blocks east on Washington Street, just past City Hall. Also, it's being live streamed on Senator May's Senate website. So hopefully there aren't people outside, are there still?
I don't know how many people
There's still a few.
There's a few people outside, so hopefully they can take advantage of that. Okay, we are going to jump to our Auburn student.
Here's the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Emerson Brown. I'm an 8th grader at Auburn Junior High School. Every child deserves a great education. The teachers, parents, and adults in our lives all received a great education. So why aren't the students of the Auburn and Large City School District provided that same opportunity? In order to have a great education with great opportunities, we need funding. From sporting equipment to art supplies, from reading teachers to reasonable class sizes. Without funding, a child will never get to experience things like being on a sports team, acting in a play, and getting involved in student government. Even critical needs such as reading intervention specialists and school counselors have been reduced or eliminated. When we in Auburn receive inappropriate funding for these programs, our opportunities disappear and we are left with unsafe sporting equipment, lack of extracurricular programming, large class sizes, and struggling students. When you were a kid, I'm sure you all enjoyed art and music, but now, our elementary schools only get art or music once every 6 days, because the art staff have been greatly reduced. This means that kids have less than 4 opportunities a month to express their creativity at school with their friends. Creative expression through music, art, or theater is often the only discipline where many students find success. How would you feel if at your job, 20% of your coworkers were terminated because of funding issues? How would your workplace function with a greatly reduced workforce? What about deadlines and productivity? Is there anything that wouldn't be directly affected by such cuts? Unfortunately, that is our reality in the Auburn School District. Vital programs have been cut, staff have been cut, teachers have lost their jobs, and student opportunities have been reduced. In 2011, we closed one of our schools. We closed one of our neighborhood schools. Let that sink in. If our funding gets any lower, we will continue to cut more jobs. School aides, counselors, teachers, and vital staff who are essential in providing the opportunity for a safe and well-rounded educational experience for everyone. If we lose more jobs, that means larger class sizes, less access to mental health services, less teacher attention, and missed opportunities for personal growth. You might be thinking that officials in the government have been alerted about our very low funding, but chances are, many of them do not know about this issue. The foundation aid that Auburn School District received is being calculated from using the data from 2003, when we were considered an average need district. In 2008, our designation moved to a high needs district, but our funding percentage remained the same. Based on articles from the Central New York News, the amount of money spent per student in the Auburn schools is around $18,000, compared to a statewide average of $25,000. This means that we are lacking approximately $7,000 per student compared to other schools in New York State. Skinny Atlas spends around $28,000 per student. Wheatsport also spends around $28,000 per student each year. So why do they deserve more funding than us, when we have the same desire to learn as them? Why is our funding calculation based on the 2003 data when we have moved to a high needs status? Why haven't our leaders fixed the 16-year-old problem? We need to address and change Auburn School District's funding issue now, so that no other student is ever prevented from reaching their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Credit to the Auburn School District for doing such a good job in educating you to be so articulate. And I think you have a future in sitting on this side of the room. Anyway, thank you. Maybe Senator Helmy, you represent Auburn.
Emerson, I too want to thank you. That was delivered beautifully, very eloquent in your comments, and I couldn't agree more. I would just add that there are some of your local elected officials sitting here at this table who have been working very, very hard and have secured the highest amount of funding for Auburn that they've received in a number of years. We still have a long way to go, and with your support and your help, you're helping us call attention to this issue, and the great people like Senator Shelley Mayer holding these roundtables. We will continue to fight and push until we get equitable funding for all of our school districts. Thank you.
Okay. Is there another one?
I'm not going to thank you for letting us skip you down. I know down, so it's
Yeah, like I want to follow that.
I'll be very brief. Emerson is very humble. She's the president of our student government society, and she's an 8th grader at our junior high. She mentioned that we did close our other middle school, and she did mention how underfunded we are. We have the lowest per pupil spending in all of central New York. We have had that for a number of years, even as we continue to raise our local property taxes. Our class sizes in the elementary school are pushing 30. We've reduced art and music. We do not meet the threshold for the number of school counselors that we should have. And as other folks have mentioned, the needs of our students have increased greatly. We have over 160 students designated as homeless in our district. We have very significant needs. We are above 50% in free and reduced lunch in our school district. Despite this, with the current funding formula, almost all of our neighboring districts receive more in foundation aid. All of them spend significantly more money than we do. So I'm glad we started the conversation with agreeing that we need to fully fund this. We do think that there are some fixes, and I look forward to getting into those as we continue. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm Don Carlisto. I'm the president of the Saranac Lake Teachers Association. Also a member of NYSET's board of directors. But my real job is that I'm a middle school English teacher. And I'm heartened that we were not halfway around the table before we started hearing about fully funding this formula. And we weren't 5 minutes into our discussion when Senator Mayer, you yourself talked about the possibility of raising revenue. I thank you, Senator, for your leadership. I also thank you, Senator Little, my representative. I know that this has been years and years of conversation about doing what's best for schools. I hope that when the conversation deepens a little bit this afternoon and the microphone works its way back, I do want to talk a little bit, because I am sort of one of the sole reps from the North Country. I do want to talk a little bit about the nature of North Country communities and the very deep intertwining of schools within the fabric of North Country communities, because what we're seeing increasingly is that as our North Country schools go, so too do go those North Country communities. They're so tightly connected. And I'm hoping for an opportunity to talk a little bit about the larger school community. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to know we've been joined by Senator Antonacci. You want to say a few words?
No, just welcome to Syracuse and glad you're doing this.
Okay, thank you. And he did point out, I just want to be clear that obviously in the budget process, we work closely with our assembly colleagues. This is a roundtable of the Senate. We are sharing information with our assembly colleagues, so the fact they're not here today is not a sign that we're not going to be working closely with them during the budget process to try to achieve the best we can.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Christina Andriata. I am here first and foremost as a public school parent. I'm also the regional director for Citizen Action, and we work very closely with the Alliance for Quality Education, but again, here today as a parent. My son goes to school in Utica Public Schools. There's over 10,000 students in the Utica School District. More than half of them live in poverty. We have the highest rate of poverty of any of the 455 upstate school districts. And like several people have mentioned already, the way that the formula is set up actually addresses the needs that we have in the district. We have a high number of students with special needs, drastic amounts of poverty, students on free and reduced lunch, and a drastic number of students who are English language learners. We have one public high school. The students there speak over 47 different languages, and we aren't even beginning to meet the needs of those students, much less provide them a sound basic education. A lot of those students are refugees. They come in, many of them with PTSD. There's no services for those students. The students who live in poverty itself causes a lot of trauma, and there's not enough support services for those students. So as many others have already said, we just want to see the formula funded. The formula addresses the needs we have in the district. Want to see it funded. Very happy to hear you talking about finding additional revenue streams. I think that's going to be critical, and looking forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Yusuf Al-Dukri, I'm the director. I got a promotion apparently, but I'm the director, not the executive director of the Central New York chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. The New York Civil Liberties Union is the foremost defender of civil rights and liberties in New York State, and we have more than 200,000 members across the state, and my office represents Onondaga County, Madison County, Orange County, Asciutto County, Cortland, and Camden counties. Every year, instead of funding the Foundation Aid formula, and I want to be clear that many of the things that I was going to say have been said more articulately and clearly by folks who preceded me. I want to give a special, particular thank you praise for Mrs. Spring, because I think you spoke quite eloquently to the points that I was going to raise, and perhaps those that at Syracuse State School District also raised. But I do want to make sure we center this conversation around what, again, is a constitutional requirement to provide a sound, not fantastic, not stellar, not dynamic, not world-class, basic education, and how the state hasn't fulfilled that. And we recognize that you senators are here because you understand the requirements that we need and the obligation that we have to ensure that all New York students are getting that access. But what this specifically means in Syracuse and districts in this area is that the Syracuse School District owed more than $45 million under the current funding formula. It means that that's about 10% of their annual budget, or $2,111 per student in additional aid. North Syracuse is owed $11 million. East Syracuse, $4.7 million. Utica, $47 million. And that means that when it comes to the types of educational opportunities that exist for students, there aren't enough counselors for students. So in the Syracuse City School District, specifically that means there are 40 school counselors for approximately 20,000 students, a ratio of 500 students to each counselor, which is compared to the recommended ratio of 250 to 1. It means that in the Syracuse City School District, there are 8 school-based health centers for 34 schools. Some of the challenges are particularly magnified here because we have the highest concentration of poverty amongst Blacks and Latinos in the country, which is similar but different to poverty and generational poverty. We are the 9th most segregated county in the country, Marietta County. We have a significant amount of our population that are English language learners, so English isn't their first language. We have a significant struggle with students who have disabilities and a spectrum of disabilities. And over 50% of our students live in poverty in the city of Syracuse. We're asking that the state fund it, and then we can have a discussion about what additional types of things we should be doing for, but as a floor, I think we're calling upon the state to do that. Again, I think there are going to be plenty of other folks who can speak in addition to the many other points that I would have raised. But one thing I do want to raise is that in a conversation that particularly impacts Black and brown students and students of color, there are very few people of color here. And I don't say that to scold you all, because I think you all are doing a significant amount of effort to address these issues. I take this, I believe and understand that you all take it seriously. But this has particular impacts on students of color, and I think it would be really beneficial for us to continue to elevate their voices. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pat Bowie. I'm a school board member of the Syracuse School District, and I'm also a member of the executive board of the Big Five. The urban districts all have similar issues, and along with rural districts, I understand. But for us in Syracuse, the number of English language students has increased. We have a high number of our children living in poverty. We also have an increasing number of students with disabilities, and the number of children in our community that's experiencing trauma is on the rise. So what we're asking is that the foundation aid formula must be reviewed and updated to ensure that these factors are properly accounted for, and that increases must keep pace with the expenses related to providing additional services as well as inflation. We have 21,000 children in our district, and they are high needs, and we need help. We're the same as the other Big Five urban districts and some of the smaller districts, I realize. But the foundation aid has to start keeping account of all the trauma and the changes that our community is experiencing, and our children need our assistance.
Good afternoon, I'm Suzanne Slack, the Chief Financial Officer for the Syracuse School District. I would like to echo what my predecessors have said, and in thinking about the foundation aid formula, we're trying to use math to solve social issues, and that's complicated. And I think the formula, the way it's set up, is doing a good job of addressing that, but each year we do manipulate the formula in some way to drive funding where it needs to go. I think we all appreciate and understand that when it benefits our district. The issues in our community walk into our schools. So if the community does not have the ability to address trauma issues, mental health issues, we can't ignore those in the morning when the kids show up at the door. And that's what we're asking the foundation aid formula to look at. So look at what's happening in our community, build that into the needs index in the formula, and know that I think the Big Five is very vocal. I think the Senate has done a tremendous job over the years listening to our needs. It happens here first, but then it permeates out to the suburbs. So Liverpool, for example, looks a whole lot more like Syracuse on paper now than it did 10 years ago. And the formula really needs to take a look at those factors and address them in terms of funding.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Sojewicz. I'm the president of the Syracuse School Board. A lot of what I was going to say and what affects Syracuse has already been said. In addition to that, it's important to realize that Syracuse City Schools need additional foundation aid because the district is heavily reliant on state funds. 78% of our general fund revenue is state aid. And Syracuse City School District is fiscally dependent, as are all the other big 5 school districts, and has no ability to raise local revenue. In addition to that, I think it's important to keep in mind the use of the free and reduced lunch percentage as a poverty factor, that it needs to be revisited. Because Syracuse City participates in the community eligibility program, where all students are eligible for free lunch, there's little incentive for parents to fill out the eligibility forms. So what it looks like on paper is not reflective of what we're seeing in the district. And so as a result, we're not able to meet all of the needs of our students. So I wanted to close by saying thank you again to the senators for your commitment to equity and for having this discussion this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to say thank you, senators, for bringing this forum to Syracuse. It's the first time that the Syracuse City School District has the opportunity to participate in this forum. The good thing is that I won't be saying much because my 3 colleagues already took some of my points, but I do want to say that when we go to all... Oh, sorry. Hi, Melisea, Superintendent of the Syracuse City School District.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. So one of the points that I want to make is that when we go to Albany to lobby for extra funding for education, we hear about, the money is not there. We need to make sure that everyone gets some money, for health, for correction, for this and that. So I want to make sure that people get the message that, give us the money that we need to educate the children in upstate New York, so we won't have the health issues that we have in the community, that we don't have to deal with the corrections issues that we have in central New York. And I just want to remind people that the zip codes in upstate New York are as important as some of the zip codes in downstate New York. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Bonnie Russell. I'm here on behalf of New York State PTA. I'm their past president, but I have resided here in Central New York my whole life. I attended public school here, and both of my children have as well. I would like to just share with you, though, a few items from New York State PTA, and basically I'm not going to repeat a lot of what's been said, but the basic thing that's being stated is that we need equitable funding. We all want to make every child's potential a reality, but we're not able to do that right now. In order to update the foundation aid, we'd like to just suggest a few things. Update the costing out study to determine the appropriate foundation amount per pupil. And I think based on the statements here today, that is definitely something other people are looking for. Update student need factors. That's been discussed a lot around this table. And third, update and restructure the regional cost index. We also want to thank you for including us. The parent voice is so important, and the more that we can be heard, I know everyone around this table, you superintendents, listen to us, but we're glad that the Senate and as well as the Assembly always invites us and listens to our voice. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us. I appreciate the chance to be able to sit at the table and participate in the conversation. My name is Amy Heisick. I'm wearing several different hats. I am a parent, I am a teacher in our Syracuse School District. I'm also the education coordinator and here on behalf of the New York State PTA as well. As a teacher in the New York Syracuse School District, we've seen our enrollment and the needs of our district increase as well. Our ELL population, English language learners, is increased, our students with disabilities is increased, and our funding has not kept pace with that. Our staffing has decreased as well, and the number of mental health needs of our district has increased without the ability to have the staffing to adequately support the students who have trauma and who need those mental health supports. So it's the same theme that's being echoed around the table, but it hits home for us as well. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Carlin, and I am the superintendent of Schenectady Central School. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to investigate this further. It is something that is incredibly important, as we've already discussed. Schenectady is a small rural school, 330 students, one building. Our property and income wealth continue to decline annually. Our free and reduced population is just under 50%. We have no ELL students, and our special education population is over 20%. Our current budget is just under $9 million. Last year, we were listed as number 3 on the comptroller's most fiscally distressed New York State school list. Our biggest problem is trying to provide a quality education for our students after being underfunded in foundation aid for the past 9 years. This year alone, we are underfunded by $700,000, which is equal to a 20% property tax increase if we were to get that from property taxes instead. The current formula does not consider what our rural school, which sits in a community with no industry and increasing poverty, really needs to survive as a district. Our K-12 sustainability is short-lived. We have about a year left as a K-12 building if something does not change with foundation. We're currently investigating 3 options: a merger with the neighboring district, tuitioning out our 7th through 12 students to other districts, or hoping for not this option, but dissolving our district completely. So again, if something does not change for us, that's the path that we're headed down. We've cut to the point where we have no electives for our students. We can barely get our students to an advanced Regents diploma, and our class sizes have increased, and we're down to singletons in every area. So unfortunately, we can't cut anymore, and our taxpayers are so impoverished that we cannot ask them for the money that we need in order to survive. So again, thank you. I appreciate you taking this as an important issue.
Hi, good afternoon, and I apologize for my lateness. I was told by somebody else I was invited, so that was pretty interesting. My name is Talana Jones. I am a parent of a student with a disability here in the Syracuse City School District. I am also program manager for the Syracuse Community Connectors, which is an initiative to amplify the voice of the community. So thank you for having us here today and the opportunity to do so. In these conversations around education, we all most of these folks are much more well-equipped to talk about quantitative data of the experience of not having enough money. What I'm here to offer is qualitative, right, and the experiences and the stories. So while you have lots of numbers about the increase of those who are considered English language learners and students with disabilities, the issue is, what does that look like when you do not have the money to support them? And so when we talk about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, first and foremost, it says that disability is a natural way of life. So all of these school districts will continue to have to support them. Upstate New York continues to be a place that new Americans come to and are looking to experience a different life. And so that means we have to service their kids because they have a right to education. You all know that. That's why you are here listening to us in the first place. But that also means that folks are doing things that they're not supposed to do. That means that individualized education plans are being written, but then you cannot support the students in the way that you know they need to be supported. Why? Because you do not have enough consultant teachers, because you do not have enough mental health counselors, because you do not have enough support staff, related services, speech therapists. You have people sharing between buildings. So that means when you're creating an actual space where you want the best outcomes from students, and I know that the language of the law says sound quality, basic education, but we're also talking about meeting the needs of folks who will become our next generation of people who will be electing officials, who will be running this place and space that we all live in, and yet we are doing them a mass disservice by continuing to ask people to plan, to pay for, to piecemeal education outcomes for things that we know are not going to happen. And so those of us who are committed to the best practice and outcomes of students' lives, we also sit there and we know good and well that we are doing a lot on a shoestring budget. And so I come to you today from a school that is looking at the social, emotional health care of students in their building. And the very idea that there is not enough staff in the district, as much and as hard as the district is trying to ensure the outcomes of the students that they're trying to serve, they literally can't. Literally can't. Because they don't have enough money to do so. And I think when we think about how egregious that is, the ask to fund the formula as it currently stands right now is important, but I do think there is a reflective moment to really say, what are the other needs that have increased over time? Disability is natural, so it's going to continue to take place. But this notion of mental health and how we serve the students in the classrooms as it stands is something that I think we've been paying attention to more and more. I know the state has to report out on a particular choice that we chose to talk about the social emotional health of our students, and to be able to do so and to pay people at a rate that they would want to service children in a public school would need to be that it's a comparable rate to anything else, right? And so that those kinds of questions continue to be impacted by that. So thank you for listening. There are some other things and items to consider, and we'll be happy to submit that via paper.
Keep going. And thank you, I apologize if the invitation wasn't communicated to us.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Mall. I'm the superintendent in New Hartford Schools. That's a suburban district right next to Utica, New York. I want to thank the panel of legislators here today for listening. You know, the theme is the same. We all have our set of challenges. Hartford was recently susceptible to fiscal stress on the comptroller's list because of property tax refunds. We have large retail centers in our district. They have issued $6.1 million in property tax refunds in 4 short years. Now that equates to about 11.67% of our budget. Now if the state had the same percentage applied to your budget, it would be a $19.6 billion gap. So we've all faced our set of challenges here. The bottom line is you have an educational conference board that has come out and said they need to fund a formula, which is made up of stakeholder groups across the state. All the tweaks you can make to the formula will be proportionate. In the end, you're still going to have a $4 billion problem. You need to come up with a way to fund foundation aid. Right now, you have winners and losers with the foundation aid formula. You have districts that are 50% underfunded. You have tiers of 40 to 50%, 30 to 40%, 20 to 30%. It's a bad policy. And a funding formula that has those kind of inequities is bad policy and it's bad for kids. It's a sustainability issue for school districts. Our state aid has increased less than 2% per year over the last 10 years based on our wealth measures. Meanwhile, we have a property tax cap that had less than 2% for 2 years in a row and was virtually 0% for a couple of years. Where do we get the resources from? And essentially, you need to come up with a formula that is adequate, equitable, predictable, and transparent. And I appreciate your time here today and listening. Thank you.
My name is Charles Borgognoni. I'm the Executive Director of the Central New York School Boards Association. Our association represents 50 boards of education in the joint BOCES management team of Onondaga, Portland, Madison, Cayuga, Onondaga, Tompkins, Seneca, Tioga, and City, formerly Oswego BOCES, as well as the city of Syracuse. We obviously have a very diverse membership. But one thing is common among all of our members. That's poverty. It's a reality for, as I say, all of our member districts. Starting certainly here with the city of Syracuse, but it also extends into our rural, suburban, and small city districts, where in many cases there is abject generational poverty and insufficiency of living wage employment opportunities and related social issues, not to mention a property tax base that in no way is able to compensate for insufficient levels of state aid, foundation aid, or otherwise. Thank you for having the meeting today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. So I'm going to begin by just standing up for a moment and toasting you, and thank you for this. I'm going to do this also because by doing so and outstretching my arm, brain research tells me that my mind will not wander, as yours probably is after 20 minutes of sitting still. So I want you to just kind of move around a little bit, because as a teacher, we have to move. Or I could sing a song. If I started singing, you would also see brain research go into another level. Anyway, I'm Donna Asciutto. I'm the superintendent of the East Syracuse Minoa Central School District. This is my 46th year as an educator in New York State, having served 31 in Syracuse City School District in the past 15 years as the superintendent of ESM. So with that, I want to focus on why we're here. Thank you, senators. Thank you, Senator Mayer, for asking this question. Thank you, senators, for joining us. Thank you, Senator Antonacci, for being here. The key thing we want to ask our children when they come home is not, what did you do at school today? What great question did you ask? So thanks for asking the great question. What do we need to do with the formula? I'm going to address a couple of key points. I have them all in writing for you today, and I'm going to answer those specifics when we get into the dialogue. But here are the key points about the formula. It was based on the successful school model. It was created in 2007, as you said. Another interesting factor about 2007, it was the advent or the invent of the iPhone. So in 2007, we had the iPhone. Now 12 years later, we have Model 11. Here's what happened with the formula, however. Our formula has not addressed, as the iPhone did, by creating model after model. By the way, you can no longer get the parts to iPhone 1. So what does that tell us? But we kept a formula at the same level at which it was created 12 years in a row. It no longer addresses with the amount of adequacy, safety and security, the federal and state compliance requirements such as ESSA, technology, special education, English language learner increases, mental health and social emotional needs, poverty, which is increasing. And it no longer is, and the other factors are fully funding the formula. With all due respect, the actual loss for ESM is $53.6 million over 12 years. $53.6 million. And I can tell you that Syracuse is far greater than $45 million. So it is to know that that is an exponential amount. We are not standing still, we are losing ground. So let me tell you the other factor in the formula to just educate all of you. When the formula was created, successful school model, it had your base formula, it multiplied by an inflation rate, 1 point whatever, 2 point whatever it might have been, and then you got your new formula, baseline. It now does a very creative way of math. You get your base, it multiplies by 1, and you get your new formula. So if I give you $10, I multiply it by 1, the next year, you still get $10. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why we can do, that is the essence of what is the issue of the formula. The formula is multiplied by a factor of 1. Thank God they didn't make it 0. But they made it 1, so we remain flat. And every year we lose ground. If you investigate, you will find that to be the truth. And I have experts in this room that can help you. In addition, our ability to pay. We did not consider the fact that we would have a 2% test cap, and I understand the need for it, for the predictability factor. But with it, foundation aid being flat now creates other complexities for us. So that's the essence of the overall. I will say this to you. If Apple had done what we had done with the foundation formula in 2007, they'd be out of business today. But instead, they're leading with over $240 per share today on the New York State Stock Exchange, which has increased exponentially due to the fact that they created the models that met the market need. If we can do that with the formula, we will see students graduate in New York State exponentially. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Scott, and I'm president of Syracuse Teachers Association, and it's good to see so many people in the room from Syracuse that have spoken to our concerns, and it's good to be here on the same side of the issue as the folks down there from the district, so thank you for being here today. I'm a social worker, have been a social worker in the district for 14 years, but in this community for 26 years, and as a social worker, you can't help but become painfully aware of the impact of poverty. As a social worker, I'm trained to analyze and view things from a systems theory perspective, and I have to say that the system is broken, and only by funding will we be able to impact it positively for our students. So thank you.
Thank you. So before we open it up to some questions, one, thank you all for your very thoughtful analysis. I just want to give a little context, and forgive me for being frank, that's my style. This is not a budget hearing. And while I appreciate everyone here is mad about how much foundation aid is on the table, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we thought, it's important to understand the sort of the structure and the politics of what happens during the budget process. First place, the Senate, in our majority, and I actually think in the prior majority, in their own budgets, had a full phase-in of the foundation aid formula over 3 years. The regents recommended a full phase-in. The Assembly Democratic majority recommended a full phase-in. We are on the same page that foundation aid needs to be fully funded. So I don't think anyone here on our side disagrees with that. And I think while I respect that people are mad about it, and I can tell you I come from Yonkers, New York, a district that has been totally decimated and is on the verge of catastrophe every year. I understand, and we all understand, from rural and suburban and urban districts, and John Lewis from the city of New York, the impact of not fully funding the Foundation Aid formula. That is a given. And while I understand people want to talk about it, and it's perfectly fair, this is a roundtable and we come in here, I would say the opportunity today is to be constructive about things we can bring to the table as we go back next year. Because here's what happens. In January, the governor puts forth his budget. He has the driving force in the budget process. He puts a certain amount on the table for foundation aid. Last year, $318 million. That was far less than the regents recommended, over $1 billion. The Senate and the Assembly put forth their own countervailing proposals, which do not have the force of law. Until we get to a negotiated budget with the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly, we don't have an agreement on foundation aid. So we'll have a budget hearing, and people can come and say we need more foundation aid, and I think you'll have very receptive members here from the legislature across in both houses. And I don't have any problem with hearing it. I just would say take advantage of the fact we're having this roundtable to talk about some of the specific things in your district. And if there are things we can learn, and many of you have brought forth great points today, besides fully funding the foundation aid formula, we got that. It's just agree, given. But there have been many very constructive points brought up here about the needs of students, which either the foundation aid formula does not address, or in the funding of it has disproportionately impacted your district because you've lost out along the way, as your point. Even though we've increased the total amount of spending, given what you anticipated, you are basically losing against fixed costs, or this issue of the tax base in your district, or the fact of rural poverty, or the fact of urban poverty and diversity. Fair point, understood that. I think it's important that you use this as an opportunity for constructive suggestions for how we can improve. That is the reason we're doing these, and I hope you take that in the spirit of this is an effort to really build something that is useful to us when we come up with our one house. Senator Lou, you want to add something?
Yes, I absolutely want to add on to what our chairperson has said already. I just wanted to maybe help kick off the conversation because I wanted to know some of the things that I thought were interesting. Obviously, lots of people, maybe not lots of people, but at least several people said that the formula itself seems to be okay, we just need to fully fund it. We hear that point loud and clear. I agree with everything our chairperson has said about our constraints on the funding and increasing the overall budget size, specifically given with regard to what the governor has put down as a constraint on all of us. But some other interesting points I thought were the observation that, for example, the formula never anticipated the impact of tax caps. One person mentioned that, well, perhaps instead of sparsity, or in addition to sparsity, maybe have a recognition of transportation, the need for transportation costs explicitly. Other people mentioned the fact that the free and reduced lunch applications are no longer accurate just because many of these school districts give those meals free already, so parents don't no longer need to apply for those programs. And then you back on the sparsity point. I think I heard some people say that the sparsity issue needs to be more deeply addressed in the formula, and others said that the sparsity issue probably does not need to be addressed in the formula. So I mean that's just an example, at least to me, of how there are going to be different interests, competing interests, and differences of opinion, which is why we need to lay out as many things in this roundtable as possible. So I want to echo our chairperson's call for, her imploring of everyone here, not simply to talk about the fact that we need more money. We all understand we need more money, but specifically what aspects of the formula work and what need to be changed. Thank you.
Before I go on though, we had a few other people on our list, and I don't see them here, but Sally Santangelo, is she here? Or Sharon Owens? Michael Eif from Chittenango couldn't come, and Nina Carbacco from Jamestown. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate what Senator Liu said, because I've heard about the sparsity issue from both sides, and I think it's something that's really worth talking about, of how do we come up with a better solution that isn't disadvantaging people. This issue in Oneida, where people live right across the street from someone whose tax rate is way lower than theirs just because they live in a different school district, that kind of issue I think we have to pay attention to. I want to go back to what Tawana brought up, but some others too, about trauma, because I think we had a roundtable with high school students, and we left it very open what they wanted to talk about, and what they wanted to talk about was gun violence. And we aren't talking about high-profile, terrorist attacks where hundreds of people get killed. We're talking about the day-to-day reality on a lot of the streets of Syracuse, and kids who have family members who've been killed, friends who've been killed, who hear gunshots all the time, who deal with this every day, it seems like, and who bring that to school. Inevitably, the trauma from that. And so we have issues like that are clearly expenses for our schools to deal with. We need the mental health assistance in our schools. We need teachers who are trained in how to be allies to students who are dealing with that kind of trauma, and the teachers themselves in a lot of cases are dealing with it. So I feel like that's nowhere in the formula, and I don't know how we put it in the formula, but I would love to have some of that discussion.
Yeah, I just think that we have to get up-to-date data that we're working on in the formula, and the poverty, we've got to come up with a better way of measuring poverty in our schools, and the free and reduced lunch is not it. So those are two things I think are important. And rural schools are different. I represent 49 different school districts in my Senate district, which is larger than Connecticut. But very small, very large, but not close together. I have 2 schools merging. I have 3 villages that have dissolved. Everybody's trying everything. So ideas are important here.
I want to thank everyone for everything that you've contributed. Many of the issues that you've talked about, I have heard from school superintendents and school boards. And I think there are concrete changes that we should be making to the foundation aid formula. Without getting into the specifics, so I just want to touch on one thing very briefly. And that's our kids are in school for 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, and then they leave school. And then they go home to situations where that trauma originates from. And I think in terms of the state budget, we have to stop thinking in terms of different silos, like schools need this money to deal with mental health and trauma and poverty and not enough housing and not enough food to feed kids, and look at the community partners too, and what are we doing in the state budget with those community partners? Well, we're slashing their budgets too. These kids don't stand a chance unless we look at the whole issue, the bigger picture. We provide the schools with the foundation aid formula that they need to do what they can to encourage family support, to get the mental health issues addressed, to address the safety issues, but also that our partners, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's mental health agencies, whether it's residential treatment programs, whatever it is, that they're also fully funded so they can be a team player, a support system for our schools.
So one specific thing I think would be helpful. We have different districts here, and we intentionally did that. We have rural districts, we have urban districts, we have suburban districts. I think there was a very interesting point that's been raised here and elsewhere. The ring of suburbs around all of our cities, around Syracuse, around the city of New York, Buffalo, have changed dramatically in the 10 years since 2007. That in and of itself is something the formula doesn't reflect the update. So I would ask for those of you who think that the measurement of poverty, which is free and reduced lunch and census data, free and reduced lunch for the student side and census for the community, if you had proposals for specific and more appropriate measures of poverty in your district, recognizing a rural definition might be different than a urban definition, that would be helpful. Anyone want to jump in on that? Yes, sir.
Direct certification would probably be the most equitable and up-to-date because you have that data every year who are using like SNAP benefits and so forth. So direct certification would probably be if you were to pick one measure of poverty that's current and equitable. It would also account for some of the community schools who are giving 100% reduced lunch. You don't have to worry about it then. So.
Yeah, well, just one thing, we haven't talked a lot about it, but in communities with a high number of immigrant and particularly immigrants who are not likely to fill out any forms, direct certification is not always the best. That might be for Utica type.
So one of the things I think related to this is just counting frequency is fairly one-dimensional in thinking about poverty. There are really three dimensions of poverty that impact. Certainly, the more kids that are impoverished in a classroom, the more difficult it is for that teacher to get all the kids where they need to be, but the intensity of poverty matters. Right? So kids that are just hovering near the poverty line are very different than kids that are way below the poverty line. And then duration of time that family has been living in poverty also matters. So taking those other two variables into account, I think are pretty important. All poverty is not the same. Intensity and duration of time make a big difference.
Do you know if that's being done anywhere, like anybody's indexing that in a way that would be then translatable to a formula?
So there are researchers who research the effect, can draw those correlations. I don't know about policymakers who are translating that into funding formulas.
What about the ALICE formula that United Way uses?
That's what I was going to say. So the Syracuse Community Connectors are a program that is funded under the HOPE initiative. And so we have Great Syracuse HOPE here in Syracuse. And it's funded through the governor's ESPRI initiative. And so they are already looking at it. And what we've learned now, as you talk about the different indicators of poverty, is that really it is our ALICE population. And however that formula is, and they're seeking to do that going forward. They haven't really begun to look at it in its entirety, but that is the ongoing work of folks who will not qualify for any of their SNAP benefits or support, folks who will not probably fill out paperwork, who have multiple jobs, but are living at different ranges or right above the poverty range. But I guess I wonder, and this is as a layperson, somebody who is not akin to looking formulas, but when we keep saying poverty, what do we mean, right? And tell me about the indicator of that in educational outcomes, because the truth is that just because you're poverty doesn't mean that you're going to not do well in school. We have some of our most gifted and brighter students who are experiencing those things and situations at home, but show up to school and excel. So what is it that we're trying to do, or what is it that we're trying to get at when we say folks who are poverty? And without the intersection of race or disability and class, then we also miss out on the fact that sometimes people use the word poverty to mean Black and brown students. And since we're being frank, right?
So, just to answer your question, in the formula, in the law,
yes,
rather than using words like race, I think the theory at the time was that the number of students who qualified for free and reduced lunch was a neutral way of determining income of the student's family.
Mm-hmm.
So they were financially eligible for free and reduced lunch. This was a long time ago, 12 years ago, was the way of determining, and that collectively that was one factor in determining how much a district should get, because disproportionate numbers of students who are low income means a district has greater need and probably has less ability to raise money outside.
So, whether it's direct certs or free reduced lunch forms, both those require that an individual or family fill out a secondary set of forms, which requires them to self-report and expose themselves to the need, whether they're, for whatever reason. there's already a form, we already collect that information via income tax. We're already collecting that from every person in New York State. I don't know why we need to collect the second set of data to collect that same information we already have. The only group that you would miss would be your senior citizens who might have STAR, which is STAR data you can use with your senior citizens. So you already collect that data, there's really no reason to collect the second set of data. We just need to look at that data.
I don't, at least in Syracuse, I don't think everybody files. So I don't think that would be a good way to determine our poverty rate, at least in Syracuse, because there's a number of people in our population that do not file.
Yes. Other ideas on the measurement of poverty issue, yes.
For districts that have community eligibility and we're feeding 100% of the kids, it really is a sign that it's systemic. So here in Syracuse, there is a small portion of kids that live in wealthier neighborhoods and not necessarily in need of all the additional services, but when it's community eligibility, it really is symbolic that it's systemic. And I think that should apply in the formula as well.
Yes, well, we're hearing community eligibility throughout the state. Many districts are offering free lunch to every student and getting rid of the stigma of free and reduced lunch and just moving to free lunch for all. And that's one of the reasons why I think, and others may think, that free and reduced lunch is no longer the correct factor. And the ALICE that's mentioned before was a United Way sort of compiling of data that did not require someone to affirmatively file a piece of paper, but looked at a variety of factors and captured people who may not be income eligible, as I think you mentioned. In Syracuse, they may not be eligible for benefits, but they're living precariously close. It doesn't pick up this intensity point that was made earlier. Yes, someone else, yes.
The poverty measurements need to certainly reflect the costs around the state, but also the poverty factors in the formula should not be limited with maximums or caps, the poverty indicators. Maybe other indicators might cap or maximize, but not poverty. I don't know, but right now, there's maximums and caps, and that takes away from those with higher levels of poverty.
Anyone else on that issue? I want to raise another issue and then maybe we'll get break. Is on homeless. Several people mentioned homeless. For those of you for whom homeless population is an issue, can you give some sense of what your experience has been, how prevalent it is in your community, and whether how it affects the overall school environment in terms of additional financial?
We've had an extreme surge in homeless students in Auburn. We're located about 45 minutes away here. When students lack housing, we are required to bring those children to our building, no matter where they may find their temporary housing. So we send rides out to Syracuse, bring them to Auburn schools every day. 45 minutes away, 30 minutes away in Eastport, down to Moravia, 20 minutes away. None of that is accounted for in any formula measures. In addition, Auburn has unique circumstances in being the only place in our county that has any type of services for homeless students, but also for students who have incarcerated parents. We have a large prison in our city, and the needs of those students and the trauma that they deal with is not captured in any way for our schools. So that there's a myriad of services and you don't. I'm not a social worker like some of the other folks have mentioned, but just things you don't even think about, like the transportation issues that have no accounting for any form of as it currently stands. We're research, so we are on the trend, and our homelessness has increased exponentially, especially over the last 10 years. What it means for us is all of the other types of services that a child needs when they're actually not in a situation in which they have a predictability of their home situation. It's greatly impacted our transportation. So we're transporting up to 50 miles each day, both ways, students who want to remain because that is where the stability is, and yet those issues become increasingly greater.
the ability to provide other needs for the children with regard to their clothing, their other aspects of their need, their social emotional needs, because they have this instability in their home life. Again, it's all exponential. But the number of students, and particularly after that 2009-10 situation and with the loss of major industry that had happened in this area, has been just exponential.
If you would believe the I Love New York ads on TV, and you see idyllic pictures of people hiking in the Adirondacks or swooshing down Whiteface, you wouldn't think that a place like Saranac Lake has homelessness, but we do. And the way that that's impacted our school district is that in the last 3 years, we have willingly engaged in turning our school district into one of the few community school model districts in the North Country. And we do it without targeted community schools funds from the state, as some of the other schools in the North Country get based on need. So we are going it alone because we see a spike in homelessness, because we see a spike in the need for wraparound services. And that takes money. It takes us funding a community schools coordinator. It takes us carving out physical space to house some of the related service providers. But it's what we now feel we need to do because of and to address the impacts of the kinds of issues that everyone's been talking about.
And you don't have community school?
We do not have targeted community schools because we're an average need city.
I wonder in Syracuse, yes.
Homeless is a problem in Syracuse. Usually we have about 2,500 kids a year, but we also have another issue, is kids that are being placed on foster care within the city, and that creates an issue for us, having to provide more services to the family, to the kids. So those two go together for us.
Let me also add that a lot of it is kind of informal. So I know my daughter at Nottingham High School, she had a circle of maybe 20 friends, and 3 of them were either living with some other family, just sleeping on their couch, or housing somebody in their family. So there's a lot of that going on. I mean, the city, the paper said 10% of kids in our public schools were functionally homeless. So getting your, it's hard to know how to deal with a statistic like that, but it's certainly something.
Many of our families in Syracuse, because of a variety of reasons, whether the housing condition, the housing that they live in, or a lack of income, they move, and may move in with some other family for a few weeks, and then they have to move somewhere else. So there's a lot of instability in our community, and so a lot of our children end up staying with friends while their families trying to find some place to live. There are people that are living in cars. So, and we don't always know that because they don't want to tell us. So, but we know that there are a number of children that are homeless in Syracuse.
You know, I have a couple schools that have gone to a school-based health clinic, and they used to do that, and then they stopped, and now I think some of them are going back. I don't know if any of you are doing that.
This is the other connection to poverty, right? As an indicator where some of the data kind of something laid on the table may make it a little bit more complicated. So I housed 5 children over the summer towards the end of the school year. And because you're not able to claim, because essentially you're doing kinship care, but now your household changes because your income doesn't change, but you are now supporting students who your friends and family love, but you cannot go to the Department of Social Services. You still have one income, you now have 4 children, and usually that family, due to a number of issues, also has a household that has now changed. And our housing situation, so not just homelessness, but housing in and of itself, is more of a determining factor in the ability to actually access housing through a number of our social services. So you can have a voucher and not access housing locally, which forces you to move out into the suburbs, but your students still remain here in the Syracuse City School District. And so those are kind of the responses to things that we do, but I don't want to underestimate what he said about wraparound services. Because even though the school day might be 7:30 to 3. That means that when you are supporting families at that level and at that need, there's something about staff that are staying into buildings 4 and 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock at night, or going to do home visits and going to check in. So I think how we think about the time, what it is and how we pay for the other folks who need to be in partnership with our school districts and then we create contracts with those economic services.
Yes.
So I think that it's important to look at poverty. I think that it's important to look at homelessness. I think, though, if we are only looking at those symptoms that exist within particular school districts and missing the bigger picture, and you have a larger opportunity, I think that those things exist, and as some districts have said, you know, geez, our poverty rate has gone up, or now we're dealing with an increased amount of homelessness. We're talking about systems that are an echo of a decades or centuries long system that has existed, you know, across the country, that New York State, more than other states, has been unwilling to address. Right? The reason why there are those differences, the reason why we are the most segregated school system in the country, is because we've kind of refused as a state to address proactively policies like redlining. And if we take into consideration issues like housing inequity, we take into consideration some of those other systemic issues that make poverty be highly concentrated in urban areas, and say, you know, we're going to account for that in a way that addresses not just, well, how do we put a salve on this educationally, but how do we begin to get at the root of that to make, you know, not just, you know, this kid able to read, but families able to read equitably. And it will begin to smooth out some of those dramatic differences that you see when you talk about what one school district pays in taxes, and then, you know, just next door in another district it's so radically different. I think there has to be some second order thinking here as these systems do intersect.
Yeah, Mr. Spring is really like, you're like reading my mind every time you say so this is kind of like but to piggyback off of what he said, I think in the city of Syracuse, what that means is that you have approximately 50% of the properties who don't pay taxes, right? Whether because there's a significant amount of nonprofit organizations, because there's a significant amount of poverty, or because a lot of the corporations and for-profit companies have tax exemption. And so when you have that situation happen over decades, you have kind of people who say to themselves, you know, I want my kid to do better than I did, and I want my kid to have an opportunity, so let's go to the suburban schools. And that drain really winds up creating these dichotomies where you have people who are left behind, who don't have that opportunity, who are stuck, and it becomes cyclical, and it becomes generational. And the generational poverty continues to expound upon itself. And I don't think that those issues are addressed, and I think to your point, addressing the kind of systemic legacies that existed, like segregation. Again, we are the most segregated school districts in the country, and we're the 9th most segregated county in the country, and we have the most segregated school boards within our county in the entire state of New York. And those things aren't addressed. You can go 20 minutes away, if even, and you can have some of the best schools in the state. And there is no conversation. And I was kind of shocked to hear that there are districts that are driving 50 miles to transport people when students in Syracuse School District can't get a bus when they live within a mile of the school. I remember when we had to your point, Talana, take in my nephew because my sister was homeless and moved from New York City to Syracuse, or rather her children did, and my senior parents, my mother's blind, my stepfather who has dementia, had to walk 1.5 miles to take him to school every day, which is almost impossible when you are the snowiest city per capita in the country. And so I don't think these things are really seriously thought about and aren't really seriously addressed, and I thank you all for taking the time to consider that.
And no prepaid transportation. So in the city of Syracuse, you know, putting a 2nd grader and a 3rd grader on a bus, and you're walking your preschooler. And we know how important, you know, early childhood education is. You want to, you know, they're walking their preschooler. I mean, that's what I was talking about when you're looking at things at the county level, maybe to broaden things, because the segregation is so bad in this area. And unless it's addressed with housing, I'm not sure how you're just putting Band-Aids on the school.
Yeah, you don't get aid for a 4-year-old being on a bus unless you put 5- and 6-year-olds. Now, why? Well, what would make the difference? You know, so those are little things in the law that just were created at one point in time when we didn't bus 4-year-olds. So therefore, someone's got to say, yes, give them aid, no matter what age the child is. The other one, Senator Mayor, that also is the increase in ELL students is exponential, but the factor in the formula that needs to be addressed is that in addition to addressing the need for the rising cost of the number of ELL students, we're responsible for educating the students 2 years after they reach proficiency. It's required by law. It is not funded. So we're required to deliver services for 2 additional years, but there is no funding for providing that service. And so we just keep losing ground with those not being in the formula.
And it becomes very difficult, sorry, Senator, I'll stop the second conversation. It becomes very difficult, to your point, for part 154 compliance, where you have students who are English language learners who should, if the district reaches a certain threshold for students in a certain grade level, have English, have teachers who teach in their language, or have additional services that very few any districts are actually doing. And so you have students who, in some cases, get warehoused and don't get adequate programming, and we have lawsuits that have addressed that issue. I would argue that it's in the interest of students and not trying to identify opportunities to look at vulnerabilities in the system, but really because students aren't getting their constitutional right. But this happens across this region in particular.
Well, I hear you on that, and I would say, just so you know, even though people bring the passion of living here, and I understand that, these are things we have heard elsewhere. This segregation within basically counties based on housing costs and based on the inability to have a property tax base in particularly urban areas that have been depleted. You know, I was in Lackawanna. Lackawanna compared to Buffalo, very different school district, even though completely adjacent, because they lost their entire tax base. They basically, middle-class families moved out. They're left with a new Arab American population that has completely taken over, and you know, to a great extent, and revisiting and rebuilding the city of Lackawanna. But the school is struggling, and the district. So these issues of racial segregation, of property value modifications that have really disadvantaged particular communities, we have heard elsewhere. We're very aware of it, and I would say we, in the majority, I would just say, are not considering this in a silo. We have done lots of things last year that try to address these bigger systemic issues. And this is one area that is such a big part of the budget. The other big part is healthcare, and we try not to compete against each other for money, because we shouldn't be, you know, the Hunger Games. We should be trying to fund what our state needs. So I do want people to know that, and I appreciate the passion you bring as living here, and this is what drives you. These are issues that are recurring issues throughout the state. We're very mindful of them. The reason to go out and hear them in different places is to make sure our instincts are right. We don't only need to hear them in Albany and in New York City. We need to hear them outside. So I appreciate that. We have a break. We have cookies, I think, right? Cookies and coffee for everyone. And let's go for revisit and come back at 3:10. Okay, thank you. We have a hard stop at 4:45 because of having moved all the chairs and other disruptive things which we have done. We have to put them back into order. You school people should know that. Put the chairs back where you found them. Anyway, thank you all. So far, it's been very productive. I know some people had to leave. One thing I want to jump into is the issues around disability and students with special needs. The fact that formula, I think, doesn't give a great deal of weight to the costs that you have as districts with respect to those students. And if you could, and also I know the particular issues about legal challenges to compliance with IEPs is an issue as well. So if people could jump in on that. Yes?
I'm going to come from the small school perspective. I think the fact that we are seeing so many more social emotional issues, a lot of our disabilities are not necessarily learning disabilities, but they're autism, their behavioral issues. In a small school like us, we don't have behavioral supports in place. We don't have the ability to fund that. So we look to BOCES for that, but a BOCES program you know, just like the rest of you, for us, is very expensive. So we get a family that moves into our district, and, you know, it's a family with 3 special needs children, and we have to send them to BOCES, that could sink us. So I think, you know, as a small district, not having that ability to hire those in-house staff to deal with a lot of our issues in special ed that are not just learning disabilities that we're seeing more and more of. And where do we get that money? Because we personally don't have a fund balance or a reserve that could fund that. So then what we'll end up doing is moving money from another place, and those other students will suffer because of those cuts. So having that ability to be able to fund that in smaller districts.
So just so we understand with respect to your district, if a child, you have a special needs child that you can't serve, I assume you can serve some kind of special needs children, not others.
Well, we obviously have to serve all special needs children in the school. We can't serve those you know, students with high behavioral needs. We don't have behavioral specialists. We don't have specialists that deal with students with autism, and to be able to hire someone, we don't have that funding. So for us, it's more advantageous to look for a BOCES program. But again, if we get a family with 2 or 3 students move into our district, that could be a cost, you know, $150,000 to $200,000 outlay that we have no way to get anywhere from.
Yeah. So thank you. Yes.
I'd just like to add, you know, we talked about 2007, the formula being created and enacted. We talked about the iPhone being invented during 2007. But one of the other things that happened in 2007 was the burden of proof in special ed due process complaints shifted from the parents to the districts, where districts are now basically told you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And I alluded to this in my first remarks to you when I talked about the devastating effects of an impartial hearing, where we can justify our position. We're in a good, solid footing. There are lawyers, we're experiencing one, who has identified the vulnerabilities of the system, and taking advantage of, you know, the neighboring district went through a due process complaint. They won. An appeal was made. While that appeal was being heard, a new due process complaint was filed right behind it, forcing pendency and forcing this to continue, because the attorneys realized that he can keep this thing going until the district is just depleted of all their resources. They've got to fight to maintain all the other programs, and it results in the district throwing their arms up, calling mercy. We can't do it, and it's compounded in the small rural school districts. The resources that we have to fight these, it costs me just as much to hire an attorney and do the investigation and try to prove our position as it does a district with a $100 million budget. So $150,000 legal fee structure on a district with a $14 million budget compared to that same fee on a large district. And I'm not taking away, I'm not trying to minimize the impact of due process on large districts, but when we're looking at the formula, how does this apply to the formula? I think we need to look at the variable costs and the fixed costs of the experiences that we're forced to go through. Same thing, I know we ended our last conversation about poverty, and we've had a rapid spike in the students from Guatemala, migrant farmers coming in from Guatemala, and so it increases. We had no ELL kids, and now all of a sudden we've got this influx. We've got to start an ELL program versus a district that has quite an, and I'm still not going to minimize the effect that more ELLs have, but there's a cost of starting a program and providing services to 4 kids. Talk about the economy of scale, I guess. There's the damage and the impact of an economy of scale, both in special ed and in poverty issues.
So, I guess in that same vein, you know, there's a little bit more nuance to this notion than just, you know, what are the number of kids that are there. I think a better indicator of how much effort does it take is looking at also the rate of change, right? So, you know, if the classification rate is fairly stable but high, or the number of ELL students is fairly stable, even if it's high, you know, you've got a homeostasis that exists. But when you're seeing that number change fairly dramatically in a short period of time, the organization is going to be extraordinarily stressed in trying to deal with that. So having a mechanism within the formula that can see, here is an element within the district that's changing rapidly, and that's going to require an increased amount of resources in order to be able to respond and adjust in a way that's going to do what's intended.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things that happens with students with IEPs, for instance, who may not have learning disabilities, is that, and particularly with students of color, you see a disproportionate impact on the number of suspensions that happens, and I think what we don't think about and talk about a lot in this conversation, or that I don't want to be, pointing any fingers at or speaking to folks in particular, but the amount of students that are disproportionately impacted, particularly students of color, when they have a manifestation of a disability. So if we can have a discussion, I think, about that, the kind of differences that are expressed across our respective districts here. But one of the things that I can talk to you about Syracuse City School District is that, in a district, as I said earlier, that has 40 school counselors for a body of 200,000, 500 students to each counselor versus the 250 to 1. Some of the particular things that we see is that you're not able to provide some of the services that those students are going to need. And those services are significant. The district works with several different community partners to provide kind of clinical health supports. They have youth advocates. They can speak to the number of different things that they have. But these programs operate on a kind of a small, really shoestring budget, and may not be stable year to year, and have double-digit staff numbers to support all the 21,000 students in the district. And when these things aren't factored into the kind of funds that the district should be given, what winds up happening is it's a significant challenge for students who should be receiving services, who may not be receiving services, who may have a manifestation of their disability. That manifestation can result in a police officer, school police officer being called, and that student is now suspended, and that student is now put on the school and prison pipeline. And we've seen that in this community in particular. We've seen it in other communities. We've seen students who've been housed in separate educational facilities, not with the general population, who weren't provided programming, enrollment issues, etc. So I think these are the general problems that are brought about it. So I wouldn't want to qualify it as just overzealous attorneys. I think that there are some instances, and that may not be the case in this case, but there are some instances where there are legitimate challenges, and the funding formula should be reflective of these issues and needs.
So I want to take a little bit deeper dive into the successful school model that was the original model, and what factors have now, since 2007 to present, not been considered that need to be considered in the model. Safety and security, the rising costs for that in the wake of the tragic school shootings. Following 9/11, we saw a hardening of government buildings and airports. We have not seen a hardening of schools and that level of commitment from the state to our schools in the way in which we did in government buildings and airports. So where we have our most vulnerable, youngest children, we do not have the funding and formula for safety and security cameras, software, alert apps, school resource officers, safety training, and all of the other, putting the armored one on our windows for bulletproof windows. That level of funding has not increased with the level of the need, and particularly in the wake of Parkland and other kinds of school shootings. The state and federal compliance requirements went in 2007, you could graduate from a New York State high school with an IEP diploma or a local diploma. You could no longer do that. So now it's a Regents diploma, which requires far greater resources, and particularly for the array of students that may have special needs in learning, and that has not been addressed in the formula. The budget transparency reporting that we're now required to do, that is also an unfunded mandate. The professional development for the next generation standards, not addressed. Technology, fortunately in New York State, we have the Smart Bond Act, but those monies are now being all used up. There is not a factor for a digital age curriculum that will address a factor of how we will have increased replacement costs for all of the technology that is needed. I think many people have talked about special education is clearly an exponential continuum, and mainly because in 2007 and the years prior to that, many of the children that we now fully educate within our school system as we should were in other settings. And now they are in our schools as they should be. ELL, we talked about mental health, social emotional needs, and the opioid crisis. Most recently, again, schools are being called upon in order to be a part of the source of solutions to societal issues. Certainly the poverty. And then the other part with regard to the formula I addressed earlier, it has a factor on it. I'll make it clear it's a baseline times an inflation cost. Then you multiply by 1 where it used to be multiplied by a phase-in factor. The phase-in factor never happened. So that's why we have the large gap.
It's like to add cybersecurity as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thank you. Now the social media.
Schools that are being hacked, additional resources that are addressed. One other concern I have with the formula right now is property tax cap. In the Utica community.
Can everybody hear you?
No.
Here.
In the Utica community, we have a $1 billion nanotechnology firm coming into our community. We have a $500 million hospital coming in. And we also, in our community, have a federal drone testing site. So our area is going through somewhat of a transformation. Many of our schools in our community were able to address the Great Recession, property tax cap, and limited foundation aid through attrition and reducing services or reducing staff members. My concern right now with all of this coming into our communities, there's a mechanism for us to add classrooms through building aid, but there is no mechanism for us to add staff. And there's nothing in the foundation aid formula for us to prepare our students for this transformation that's going to come in. If I have to hire 6 teachers in my school district because of this growth, I'm not sure where the resources are going to come from. And are we going to tweak it again and take away from cybersecurity, tweak it away from other services that we should be providing for students?
Just to be clear, are you referencing an increase in enrollment or a change in the nature of the future that you need to prepare your
Increase in
students?
enrollment, which I don't believe the formula catches up with increased enrollment. Right now, we're basically on a flat grant. The formula runs and we're getting $25,000 flat amount. We're not getting large increases to our state aid. And so when I need to add 6 staff members with salary and benefits, where are the resources going to come for that?
Also, if there's a decrease,
I'm sorry.
just picking on, if there's a decrease in,
Well, we haven't talked about hold harmless, and that should be part of this conversation. I mean, we have traditionally, when the formula was adopted, no one lost from where they were. And so everyone started where they were. And so one of the reasons that some districts may look like they're doing so well is they started higher. And over time, we have tried not to have losers, just winners. Even though it's not enough winning for you, we tried not to have losers. So when enrollment declines in districts, and many districts have declining enrollment, Betty knows that, it's really a challenge. And we have districts with increasing enrollment. So, this is a big, complicated, messy subject, and just so you understand, there is this decline in enrollment.
And I'd just like to add, with that increase, it's not like we're going to see additional property tax revenue.
Yeah.
Obviously, you just have more people paying to drive down the tax on true. There's not additional resources coming from all of these different firms.
Can you hear me okay? I should pass the mic down. I want to address the notion that we need to increase funding for the hardening of our schools and school resource officers. It's one of the very few things that we have actually seen money coming into our district recently, and it, I think it's complete misprioritization of resources that we need for our schools. Our district has hired school resource officers who are not trained in dealing with students. They're not trained in de-escalation. They're not trained in dealing with students with English as second language learners. And what this hardening of our schools is actually actually doing is increasing the push out of students. The exact same students who are disproportionately impacted by the lack of equitable school funding. So students who are poor, students with special needs, students who are English language learners, Black and brown students, these are the students who are getting pushed out of our schools because of this hardening. And the hardening of the schools does not make students, no, actually, hold on, you got your minute, I'd like mine. The hardening of our schools does not actually increase the feeling of safety for the vast majority of students who end up terrified when they feel that they are walking through security gates and past metal detectors and walking into a prison instead of into a school. If we want to increase the feeling of safety, for our students, it goes, we need to look at socio-emotional affirming education and increase the number of counselors and social workers and support workers that are in the schools, which is the exact opposite direction.
Okay, well, I know you wanted to respond.
I just want to be able to say that certainly I'm not talking about walking through an airport kind of metal detector, nor am I, and we have had a resource officer for 20 years. They are all fully trained police officers who are trained in dealing with schools, fully trained. So we're not talking about a security guard that has a gun on its holster. I am talking about, though, the things like bulletproofing windows. I am talking about security cameras so that we know. The notion that there could ever be an active shooter in a school has a much higher level of securing a building. I'm not talking, please understand me, I understand as a parent.
Do you know how traumatizing it is for children to go through active shooter drills? And if you're concerned about that, address the gun issue. Don't take it out on our kids.
I understand what you're saying, but I will also tell you that on 9/11, thousands of planes landed in this country because they went through drills repeatedly. That is a matter of research.
Okay, but
And
I'm going to take prerogative here, sorry, as a chair. So I appreciate the passion. I understand that there are some differences and probably some not. At this point, I want to focus on the subject at hand, which is the Foundation Aid formula, which I said before. So let's try to keep on that path. I understand there's other issues that address what happens in schools, and we do need to talk about them, and we're happy to talk about them. But today, I really, let's use it as a constructive opportunity to talk about a foundation formula as much as possible.
And Senator, if I could just
No,
add
not
one
just-
other piece of, for example, single point of entry.
All right,
I'm not suggesting.
I know, but
that we
let's
militarize
move
our
on. Let's
schools.
move on from this issue. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So I think a couple of things that have been brought up, I want to reiterate and then just, again, add a qualitative moment to it. So when we talk about districts, when we say students with special needs, it does us a disservice to not say students with disabilities, because then it reminds us of the federal law that is driving what it is that folks have to do. So they're not, I don't personally like this notion of unfunded mandates, but we do know that they're not funded at the level that they're supposed to be, both in what the state receives from the federal government, and then what is used in administration, and then what leads to direct services. Right? And so if a district is engaged in some type of litigation for whatever reason, oftentimes it's due to a due process complaint around service support. The conversation about disproportionality nationally and statewide has been around either students are being misidentified or over-identified if they're Black or Latino, or they are being identified and they're underserviced. I want us to focus on the underserviced piece, because more often than not, that comes down to how we're spending or what we don't have enough money to spend on. So not only the conversation of mental health counselors, but mental health counselors should do what? Evaluation and assessment has to be done by psychologists, school psychologists. How many people are able to afford their school psychologists, and the number of buildings and the number of children that they need to serve in order to actually have the appropriate things happening for students with disabilities. If you have students who need related services, what you find is when you don't have the amount of professionals in your school building, what drives them, according to a number of experiences throughout school districts, is that you have a conversation about placement and where you're going to service children before you talk about what their needs are and how you're going to service children. And that is the direct opposite. It flies in the face of IDEA. And so that's when we talk about our student outcomes and the ability to really have some point in there that addresses not only the increasing enrollment, but the types of disabilities that students have. So your inability to service your students with intellectual disabilities because you can't afford the new assistive technology to be able to do so is an issue. The ability to service your students with emotional disturbance within an inclusive class setting because you don't have enough mental health counselors, that's where the issue lies. And so then you find an underserviced and you leave your districts open to honestly lawsuits, really, because whatever is on the IEP becomes a legal document and they can't serve them at the level that they should.
Can I stop you for a minute? Because one issue that is amazing out there that is quite powerful is that there's no modification of the needs of, within the range of disabilities in the formula. So a kid that needs a one-to-one, you're basically treated the same as if the child who has a very modest impairment that doesn't require additional staff, maybe requires a visit with something else. So one of the thoughts that came from the president of the Teachers Federation in one of our roundtables was to have a more graded, more nuanced way of looking at what a school provides in terms of disability assistance. And I understand the words, some in the disability community prefer one word versus the other, so I'm trying to be sensitive, but to your point that it triggers the federal law, that's a very good, valid point. So I do think this idea of sort of, you're providing these range of services depending on what the IEP requires, sometimes it's far more expensive than other services, and that somebody that...
There is, the formula, you do get high cost aid,
Yes.
but there are limits that are limiting the amount of aid you can get. So there is potential to drive more aid for special needs students if we move some of those limits on the high cost aid.
Okay, yes, sorry, yeah, that was very good. Yeah,
So, I guess a couple of things around that. One is, not all of this has to come from foundation aid. Some of this can come from some Medicaid reform, right? So thinking a little bit differently about who are some of the other professionals that can bill Medicaid for some of that reimbursement. What school psychologists can bill for as services are pretty limited. If you're a small district, you don't have a lot of staff. Now that's a horrible choice to have to pick between a school psychologist and a social worker, right? So I think there's some opening up that can be done with that. But I think one of the other things that, in this vein of not just gradation of services, but thinking about needs, I think most school districts are putting, if not near the top, at the top of things that they're wrestling with are mental health crises that kids are feeling. In Schenectady, we measure our days of psychiatric hospitalization of kids by the 1,000. And
say it again?
we measure the days.
I heard what you said, but...
We measure the days of psychiatric hospitalization for kids by the 1,000.
Per year?
Per year. The number of days that our students have to spend hospitalized because of psychiatric emergency. There's not an amount of money that we can throw at that because the solutions and the resource providers within the community don't exist. And so it's another place where I think we've got to be thinking in a second level boundary scanning. It's not just what's the funding formula, but how do we use the funding formula to create some better solutions for kids? There's a really complex problem that's happening in mental health, and I don't think I'm overstating it by saying it's a crisis.
I wanted to share, Lena, I used to feel the same way, and I still feel the same way that you presented yourself. About 95 to 99% of the cases of special education that go through the process are because of exactly what you said. But I also want it to be understood that there are people that are taking advantage of a system that has vulnerabilities. And I just want to share some stories the children have shared with us. My mommy told me that if I'm really naughty, we can go to Disney World. Asking the mother, please, if there's anything else we can do for your child, can you talk to us and let us know what other services you'd like us to consider? Or let me know directly, if you're not getting it from special education, let me know directly what more we can do before you involve an attorney, because we want to help your kid, we want the services. It doesn't matter what they're looking to exploit the system, and they're getting money from. Trying to turn a settlement into cash equivalent. Compensatory services, I can't get into the details of it, but they're fraudulently trying to turn these compensatory services into cash in their pocket. And my heart breaks for the children that are being impacted by this. But I'm telling you, I offered $250,000 special education placement for a child because it's not about money. It is about getting these children into the setting that they require. But she would have lost she would have lost some Medicaid services. She would have lost finances in her pocket. And if we're talking about Medicaid, part of the whole process was, can you please just give my child an IEP so we can get Medicaid?
Understood. I understand. We didn't, some people believe the school-based health center model as a place, to your point, where there is reimbursable services outside of the foundation aid formula that might meet some needs of either physical or emotional or mental health needs of students. And I wonder, I don't know, Syracuse, do you have a school-based health center?
We have 8 school-based centers in some of our schools. Our students and our parents are asking for more. This is in partnership with the Syracuse Community Health Center, so we're trying to expand the clinics in our buildings.
But this is, I'm sorry, please, just because this is a follow-up, but this is why it's not enough to just talk about related services, and that's what we do when we talk about students with disabilities. If you want a functional class where students that actually sit inside a class, you have to be able to staff those classes appropriately.
Yeah.
And that's what the settings look like. So we're not talking about who we would build Medicaid for, which would also be tax our Medicaid system. So we're also not thinking about early intervention, early childhood, and the other folks who are utilizing Medicaid dollars as part of the expanse of pre-K through 12, right? And after that, you're going to continue to talk about the lives outside of school. But your teacher assistants, not even one-to-one staff, but to appropriately staff classrooms that then do not lead to these active places where lots of behaviors and other things arise that have us engaged in other kinds of conversations about safety, the need for school resource officers, outcomes in the building, or even going into due process because you are not meeting the needs of the students where they are in their building, or which is not, it's not legal to have a placement conversation without having a service conversation, but it is driving where we're sending kids and students, and they have a different education within the general ed population. So it leaves us at a place.
I get that. I just want to say on pre-K, a full-day pre-K for 4-year-olds outside the city of New York, that has been a priority of our conference to fight for this year as it was last year. We'll continue to, for every district that wants it, I know some districts don't, but for every district that wants full-day pre-K 4-year-olds, we believe that is really part of the continuum, that we should stop thinking of lower ed as K through 12, and it's much more of an integrated setting here. And we are going to fight for the pre-K. We haven't talked about it, it's not part of the conversation on foundation, but it's obviously fundable to some modest amount. We're not satisfied.
Well, just to, you talked about pre-K, I have another point I wanted to ask about, but with the pre-K too, then would you take away it being funded by competitive grants?
Well, the competitive grants was what we got into because we didn't get enough money. So my personal view is it should be funded as part of the
K through 12.
K through 12 for districts that want it. It makes a huge, I think the evidence is quite clear about it.
Including transportation, maybe then?
Well,
anyway.
You make a wish list and we'll.
Everybody in this room is from upstate. Would you address some of the shares agreement and why 3 out of the 5 top counties get 50% of the foundation aid? 3 of the top wealthy counties in New York State get 50% of the foundation aid. And so
the shares agreement, which is a division off the top of the amount of education aid there is, was not adopted by any of us sitting at this table. It long preceded our tenure in the legislature, and it continued under the foundation aid, and of the amount that's added, a percentage is taken for New York City and a percentage is taken for Long Island. And they are taken off the top, and then the rest is distributed pursuant to the foundation aid formula with various permutations in the formula every year. I don't know how we're gonna, I'm very honest, how we're gonna handle it.
It seems very political.
Well, but one thing I would say, if you look at the number of students
yes.
in the state, no, but let me just make this point. First place, I represent a very poor district, it's not included in shares. There are a number of very poor districts, predominantly minority districts in Long Island, that have been totally stiffed by shares and by foundation diploma. In fact, we have 2 bills that we passed in the Senate and the Assembly to impose oversight over boards of trustees of 2 school districts on Long Island, where we are trying to assert control to ensure that the money goes to students. So it hasn't been a perfect situation by any means. That being said, it is a very political deal. It was made long before we were there. What we can do about it is a conversation that we can have. I think there's great reluctance by some people to open up that conversation, but it could get opened up again. We have a new majority. We have different colleagues. I don't know what's going to happen.
Base it on the number though, they have like 38% of the children in New York City.
Almost
and they get
50% between
yeah,
Long Island and
Long Island has a 16%.
But if there's equity by wealth, if there's equity by need, then I'm not sure that's what's being served here. It might be by numbers, but it's not by, necessarily by wealth.
It's a loaded,
Political, yes.
but when you say it's political, I only say this, and not to be defensive, as if you're looking at us.
Oh,
we
no.
inherited.
Not at all.
Not only
Yeah.
shares.
But you
we
guys are the
inherited
people who
from-
can fix it.
Well,
There are 63 senators in the Senate, 25 are from New York City, 9 are from Long Island.
Well, upstate can make some noise.
Yes,
We
we
have
do.
a lot of people from
We do,
upstate
but
in the
they're
room.
not,
Yes.
it's
But
tough
we're-
to tell
yes.
them
But,
to
and
figure
I
out.
just want to say one other thing about, our efforts this year, which were not perfect, but we made a concerted effort to do the best we could with districts outside of downstate. And we're very mindful, not only Senator May and Senator Little, Senator Antonacci, and all of our colleagues, that we have districts that are rural districts upstate, we have urban districts upstate, that got left behind for a variety of reasons, and we have been we tried. Were we perfect? No, but we tried and we'll continue to try. What did you say? Yes, so we tried, yes.
I think it's appreciated.
No, I appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Teresa.
Teresa, sorry. Teresa, then.
I just want to go back to the small school. I'm probably the smallest school out of everybody in this room right now, except for some of my colleagues who are watching. But is there some way that we could factor into the formula just a base amount? Because when you have a small district like ours, where you have only 2 science teachers, 6 through 12, and then we might lose a couple of students, but we still need those same number of science teachers. Just at least to give us however you figure out what the cost is to offer our students just a basic Regents diploma and an advanced Regents diploma. Because right now where I am, I don't have enough staff to offer electives to our kids for an advanced Regents diploma. And when you look at ESSA and the requirements for college courses, we can't do that in our district. So keeping in mind a district with 330 kids costs the same to run a basic education program as one with 500 kids. And then maybe possibly offering some kind of incentive within that formula for us sharing services. So if I'm going to send my 712 to your district and keep my K6, what's the incentive for me doing that? What's the incentive for you taking those students and making that more workable if economies of scale is something we have to look at? How can we help those really small districts?
I think the sharing of services where appropriate, particularly in the small rural districts, is something Senator Little and I have talked about. She has 2 districts that have done it. It's too hard, in my opinion. They make it too hard to do. There should be creative ways for you to share resources. Thank goodness Beverly's here. The regents have had traditionally the greatest amount of power and oversight over these processes. Now we have a much more collegial relationship and we're trying to share, but I think flexibility for districts across the board is something we want to listen.
And even with merging, as you know, it's $60,000 to do a study.
I know, well, didn't we do the waiver?
Yeah, and it's 6 positive votes between both districts. So, there's a lot of emotion that goes into a merger, so it might look absolutely economically advantageous, but when you put in that emotion piece and you ask them to vote again and vote again, you're just putting more barriers to it.
I did sponsor a bill to make that reimbursable. It was the study. It passed in the Senate. I think it passed in the Senate.
Another part about the study is once they start it, they have to finish it, even though the first week they discover that the tax rates are way off. It's crazy, they need to stop it in a way. But like you said, some of the sharing of services, there's no incentive really for doing that, and there should be, that would be helpful. I have Queensberry schools, the largest of my 49. They have an international baccalaureate program. They have opened it up to any school district in the region that wants to send their kids, and they do it through BOCES. They can sign up, bring their kids in, and they do the IB program there. And that, I thought, was a big start because, you know, there's so much competition. And, you know, my schools, but when you talk about getting rid of hold harmless, you know, if you only have 6 kids in a classroom, the teacher costs the same, the building costs the same, and you're only getting money for 6 students. So if you have 25 kids, 22 teachers, the same, but you're getting more money on a per individual. And so many of my schools have legacy costs now, where they have far more retired teachers than they have active teachers anymore, and it's just constant. So it would, and their distance is unimaginable in some cases. Some of these kids are on a bus for 45 minutes before they get to that school, and then to say, and now we'll bus you to another school. Forget it. Distance learning, yes, you know, we do it all. Yes, we do.
Just very quickly, before we get too far down the road around mergers,
Yes.
certainly sharing of services is viable and important and responsible to do. But I think what the superintendent started in her introduction by saying was that the school in that community is the last sort of thing there.
Yeah.
There's no manufacturing there. I would posit that school is probably not only just the hub for the community, but the central institution that is affording a connectedness in that community. And I would further argue that there's probably an economic benefit to that community from having the school there. So I think to sort of, and not that anyone here has done this, but to sort of very quickly go to conversations around mergers and sharing of services without validating the underlying issue that was raised and that comes up in rural communities. These schools are so part of the fabric of who we are in the North Country and rural communities. That to have a fully funded formula that strengthens this community by keeping the school strong is vitally important. Thank you.
Just for a little levity, we had one school that had one graduate, a long way, and he was not the valedictorian.
I resemble that.
That is great, we're not.
So I not only represent Syracuse, but I represent an entire rural county, and I'm the chair of the Commission on Rural Resources, and so thinking about rural schools is something we do a lot, and I've heard about schools where the valedictorian couldn't get into SUNY Geneseo because they didn't have enough AP classes that they could offer, or if any. I do have this question about, I know the formula is based on a sound basic education, but it seems like sound basic education for you are at least eligible for admission to State University. That makes sense to me as a criterion for what constitutes a sound basic education, and we don't seem to be offering that. I also don't want to lose what Emerson said, as your student from Auburn. She mostly talked about enrichment classes. She talked about arts and music classes. These are absolutely critical to education and to educational success, I think, of all kids. And so I don't want to lose sight of that. And I think one of the things, one of the first things that goes probably in small schools is those kinds of programs. So figuring out how we make that.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to know who cut art and music over the last 10 years in your district. So that's Auburn, your, yes, your.
Saranac Lake.
Saranac Lake, your.
Mohonasen.
Mohonasen. Syracuse?
No, I was scratching my fingers, sorry.
We added,
You added
yes.
art and music.
But it was pretty minimal before.
Yeah, we have added, we cut it back. So through the last 4 years, we have been adding positions.
I see. Replenishing, back to
Yep.
sort of where
Yes.
where you were. Yes, sir.
You know, Senator, I think it's important also to not lose touch with the fact that you talk about adding and subtracting. This is on the heels of the gap elimination adjustment. So this is just bringing schools back to
I know.
perhaps even possibly normal.
Yes.
And we cut 300 people in 2010, 2011. So we lost $10 million a year in state aid for 6 consecutive years. We're still $120 million short from where we should be with the formula and gap elimination. So I think when you talk about adding and subtracting, we're still at a significant deficit.
Yeah, no, I think the gap elimination adjustment is absolutely, it changed it, but we wouldn't have this conversation if we hadn't had those intervening years of losing what we even were on the trajectory to see. Yes, Senator. Okay, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't know you were commenting on that. Thank you, Senator. I think that that's a really good point that I want to follow up. We've talked about kind of money that the current formula has said that we're owed for decades now. Any of the changes that we've talked about here today, or just a phase in, which we've all agreed is appropriate, would do wonders for Auburn. But we have to talk about a phase in. I don't want any schools, no matter if they're losing enrollment, to lose resources because to educate a class of 8 costs the same as a class of 6, and so on. But we, in districts that have reduced so deeply over the last decade, cut 20% of our staff since the Great Recession. So we've eliminated a lot in the recession and then eliminated another 20%. And we're not losing students. Our student population is stable. So what happens every year is we go to our taxpayers, raise right up to the cap every single year. We see the neighboring schools, because they are starting from a higher place, get more money percentage-wise, and then we eliminate more and more from our schools. I'm of an age where many of my friends are starting young families. They're all moving out of the district. Any of them that have resources in this community, we're very proud in Auburn. We're the home of Harriet Tubman. I have my Be Like Harriet shirt on today, and William Seward. And we instill those values in our students, and that's why they joined us here today to advocate for themselves. But my community had a big middle class, had, working class people, had wealthy people. Anyone with means that is middle class or upper middle class are moving to neighboring districts. I taught in Detroit Public Schools for 3 years. The concentrated poverty requires more money, not less. And the more we segregate our schools and don't mix our children, we are building problems for ourselves down the line that we'll never be able to recover for. So we have to kind of bring these districts up, like Auburn, but like Oneida, where we have high taxes, and many districts around this table, up quickly to make up for the time we've lost over this last decade when we've kind of fiddled with the formula instead of fully funding it.
I think what Ian speaks to, he's a small city school district, we're a small city school district, that sparsity factor in the formula wreaks havoc in our district, and it's concentrated for, it's generational. We are not a Syracuse City School District, but the number of meth busts that have happened in the city of Oneida, murders, and Ian's correct, people keep moving out of the community. So we take a hit because we don't have this 250 square miles. We only have 45 square miles, so we get less money. And I think that small city piece, the Small City Schools Association would be a great place to get information as to how the formula would help them.
I do think this context of the gap elimination adjustment, I did another program last night in another school in my district, where the composite impact of the gap elimination adjustment, plus the lack of foundation aid, creates this, it's not a short-term problem that you will cut down And now, even if we fight very hard to get each a little bit back, we're still way beyond what we should have been,
So I think, you know, the piece that I want to make sure doesn't get lost in this is that politicization piece, you know, that we talked about, right? So there's a notion of, you know, how do we fix the formula, and folks talking about because of this and because of that we get less. I think in most instances, the reason why, or the biggest reason why there's less or not enough in places is because of the political process, right? There are very few places in this room, I think, that are getting 100% of their foundation aid. That's a political decision that comes up with, and you know, what happens as a result of that, as is being described, the school district has to make up that gap in some way by raising property taxes. When you raise the property taxes, folks buy their home based on essentially what they can afford per month. It drives down the value. So even if the district is only raising the same amount of money in taxes, the rate goes up, driving the value down. So it's an economic doom loop for the city, you know, or for that community. It becomes impossible for, you know, that locality to reverse that trend without the state saying we're going to put this piece in place and make it possible for the school district to stop overtaxing and reverse that. It's not just a school issue. It really is an upstate economic development issue.
Thank you. First off, I may have to leave a little late. I want to thank you, Senator, for coming to our wonderful Central New York. And I know that both you and Senator Little are very dedicated to education. I myself am not on any committee associated with anything to do with education, but I admire both of their work, and I know that I've worked with Senator May on a couple issues involving schools. And you know, you talk about head scratchers. We had to go and put bills in to get penalties forgiven for capital projects because somebody made, and I've never been told anything other than an innocent mistake in filling out paperwork. So here we are trying to help children, and the very children we're trying to help, we're penalizing the school district because some adult forgot to put in a piece of paperwork. So you really, you know, my first year in Albany, I've scratched my head quite a few times. But it's been nice to work with Senator May on that as well to help our school districts. I want to, if I can pick on Professor Rick back there, I've enjoyed listening to him several times now. And I just want to make sure, you know, I think there's a lot of tweaks, and I know some of you may know my background is a CPA. We change a formula, we pick a winner and a loser potentially. But I think what we need is we need the formula to be consistent, we need it to be fair, and we need it to be updated. I think you used one stat where we're using a metric based on 2001. Am I correct on that?
2000.
2000. I mean, you're dividing up money in 2019 based on a metric that involves a 2000-year calculation. That's 19 years ago. So that to me is quite silly. But I think all of your comments have been very constructive. I appreciate Senator coming up from Westchester. I'm going to leave you with this. We've talked a little bit, danced around a little bit about mandates, and I know this is a top line issue that we're talking about today. We're talking about revenue. But in the expense side, and I don't want to say it's my trite mantra that I like to go after, but unfunded mandates affect all of our governments, school districts, counties. I was a former county comptroller, and yet we keep getting them literally shoved down our throat. I don't know what's out there that can help each of you, but each of you have different school districts that may not need that particular program or policy, and maybe you can choose to do away with that without affecting the quality of your education. What works in Syracuse might not work in, I forget the name of your small school district, but you know, two different areas. But I would love to see a list of unfunded mandates that have been passed down to you that we could help eliminate, whether it's by law or avocation to the Department of Education. When I did a quick Google search a while back on unfunded mandates, I actually came up, and I wish I had it with me, a small school district that had 4 pages, single-spaced, of unfunded mandates. So it's not going to solve your problem. I get it on the revenue side, but it's a multi-pronged attack. But again, thank you for coming here and giving us all of your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. A few other things I just wanted to hit, make sure we hear your voice on. One is, I wondered, to this point of students graduating and not being able, as you raised, Senator May, to go to a state university because they either didn't have enough AP credits or something like that. How many of you do not offer any AP classes in your high school? And that's primarily funding reasons, the cost of it? No?
I mean, for us, we have a college in our community that we're able to get
Oh,
a
you get,
partnership with a
you
college.
get a partnership there. And is that
So-
true with you?
Similar, we made a choice for the program.
I see, okay.
I think that's the best, actually, they have college credit.
Yeah. The, one other issue that I think is important to talk about, and you all know, because now you're filling out these, what I call school-specific data within your districts, and Syracuse and the Big Five had to do it earlier, and I know I've not been opposed to it, but I thought the way the governor represented the data was not accurate and did not accurately reflect decisions within districts. That being said, I think parents are very interested in knowing how much flows to a particular school after they fight very hard to get the money, like the PTA fights for, and then they're understandably disappointed when the money doesn't come to the school and it's stuck in administration, not against all the administrators. But I just wonder what your experience is with that, filling out that so-called transparency data, and how much time and energy it's taking you as school people, and whether the advocates and parents and others who represent community forces believe that that data has any particular value to you. I just wondered on your end down there. AQE or Civil Liberties Union?
Yeah, that's not an area that I'm like an expert in, so I'm not gonna comment.
Oh, so we,
Wait, did you have a comment on that?
I don't. I think that, as far as I can tell, the Utica School District is still wrapping its head around how to fill everything out and answer the questions. So I don't think we're at a point where I can say whether or not it has a value.
It's a lot of work.
So we're subject to that from the beginning. We're one of two states in the, two districts in the state that have a locally developed funding formula. But what we've discovered in filling it out and going through it is that the uniform system of accounts is not a uniform system of accounts. So this transparency formula is only going to work within district. How different districts code things is going to be significantly different from district to district to district. So the uniform system of account codes needs to be updated, and there needs to be much more thought put into the guidance around, where things get coded. Right now, there's no code in the uniform system of account codes for adult services. So where do you code that? What gets coded to a district cost versus a school building cost? There's a lot of variance in terms of where a district wants to put that.
Yes.
I think you're on target with, we certainly want to be held accountable, and you can keep piling on all of the reports that we need to complete. I mean, most recently, even at the federal level, the consolidated application and many of the monitoring reviews that we're going through now are taking exponential amounts of time. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, to what degree do we want to continue to focus resources on what we've done versus what we could do? The other part that the formula doesn't get at is, what will we do to build a new graduation requirement system that allows more students to have more choices and career pathways beyond the 1872 model of all of these courses being siloed? What will we do to address many of the career pathways in New York State, where we want students to be able to come back and live in our communities and be able to work at places that are needing to employ people, and yet our graduation requirements somewhat inhibit kids from taking those career pathways. So I think that's the other piece that we have to be asking ourselves. What should we be doing in a digital age? Again, I'll bring the technology into the factor. What should we be doing in an age in which we're going to have other kinds of artificial intelligence that are going to impact what we need to do to prepare kids in other areas of their development and being able to solve problems and to think critically and all of those things?
Yes.
So I'm the CFO for Syracuse, so I live and breathe with the financial numbers, and I welcome accountability. We get audited all the time, and we're happy to go through that. This exercise is a little bit of bittersweet for me. We've done it twice, so this is our second year. And we learned a lot. We learned that Meacham is a wealthy school, which makes no sense. It's a small elementary school in the city of Syracuse, certainly not wealthy, but according to this calculation it is. So although there's things like that that pop when you look at the data that don't make sense, they do make you look at the data. And what we found is, although the intent was to say, how is the Board of Education inequitably allocating funds to the schools, what we found is the schools that look like they're not funded fairly, it's because we followed the state regulations. So for example, this year we had to close and reopen 3 schools. In doing that, we had to get rid of 50% of the staff. So when you go and look at it next year, 50% of the staff are going to be new, young, less expensive teachers, and it's going to look like we're putting less money into those schools, when in fact we're putting a ton more in, but it's not showing up in the salaries. So going through the exercise, I know nobody wants to do it, you can glean some good information from it. What I think would be really helpful is 2 things. One, with a requirement like that, give us the tools that will do the report for us. So I have staff wasting weeks and weeks and weeks of time putting data into different buckets to fill out this form. When you have all of our data at the state level, there's companies that can pull this for you, like Forecast 5 or Rick Tim's group, can pull the data and give you that reporting and give it to us as well. But 2, I think it would be worthwhile, since we're talking about foundation aid, to run the equity formula on foundation aid and see where it says the state is really putting money in places and it's not providing equity between the school districts. I think it would be eye-opening for the purpose that you're here today.
No, I appreciate that. Yes, and then we'll like 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, we've been doing the reporting as well. What the report will not tell you is the story behind each school. There's 4 primary buildings, not big enough to house special education programs for each, so they're divided amongst 4 places. Our L's are all in one building, because the buildings are about 200 students per building. So it looks like we're inequitably funding those buildings. Plus, our contract will not allow us to move our teachers. So teachers that have been there longer will fit into a certain building, so their salaries are the highest. So I think there's a story that goes beyond just the numbers that is not being asked for.
So, yes.
I think unfortunately for families, then when they see that information and it's made public, when they go to advocate and spend their time and energy on talking back to the school district about what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, then you're met with the answer that that is actually not the case. You end up getting the story, and now you have energy that could have been put toward really talking about some other things in terms of what could be happening in the actual buildings, lost on that conversation because it's a number attached to the school without that piece when it's reporting. So I get it, it's helpful in terms of questioning and trying to hold accountable where money is spent on your children. But for families and advocates and those who want to support their school districts, both locally and at the state level, it actually makes it becomes a different kind of conversation, a more polarized conversation sometimes, and unnecessarily so, and really we could be talking about like what does that look like and why does it feel like that, especially with when we jump that's surprising to me. I don't want to lose 2 things in the conversation earlier. One, I know you talked about not having silos or the importance of having a conversation along with other things. So just going back to ESPRI and the whole initiative, I wanted to say Syracuse particularly, our conversations in Syracuse, we keep having to remind people that it's not just poverty, it is concentrated poverty that is impactful. And that's important when you think about how we look at it over in the project. We're talking census tract and having over 40% of people living below the poverty line in a particular census tract. And I think that goes back to what I forget his name who was just here, and what you said talked to specifically about redlining and the disparate impact on Black and brown communities, and then taxation and so forth and so on. So I think it's important to consider this notion of poverty throughout the city, or the areas versus this piece about concentrated poverty, because then it then factors into school of things that might not feel like when we say we're surprised by that, you look around and go, this is on that side of the city. We know that they're servicing those kids, and then, so forth and so on. The other thing is that our school district utilizes our central bus system for our high school.
City bus.
Yes, that's a city bus. And so I've been thinking about how we're transporting students and access to school buildings, when we have things like high school choice around the entire district. Families are all over for middle school as well. And so when our school buses when our central buses don't go past a certain time in the afternoon, even though they definitely arrive at the school when it's time to leave, if we're having after-school programs and all of the things that you want to have and what's happening, we don't have the opportunity to be able to transport some students, especially if they're not a student with a disability, back to where they need to be, because we have a bus system that supports our surrounding students, but not supporting where they need to go. And then last but not least, I lost the point.
I just want to say I'm very glad you raised an issue that's not the subject of this, which is transporting, using our public bus systems in a more integrated way with our schools. We have really, for some reason, have rare conversations about how to do it more effectively, probably more inexpensively, to allow students to participate in after-school activities, to encourage the school as a more community school model. I think, one of the takeaways from this, and maybe it's not what you intended, is that the wraparound nature of services, whatever they are, is essential for your students to succeed. And that we have to think about schools in that way, and that when we fund the community schools, which we have done in certain places, I know you're doing without the funding, it has been a successful model of addressing improving school performance and student performance and providing sort of the necessary array of services that our students, particularly students in concentrated poverty and within that point need. And also some of our schools in distress. I mean, I've had a number in my district that are on the list. I've been on the list several times, come off the list, get on the list, lose the money, come back on. It's a very difficult system to manage your way through when you have a district with a high degree of poverty and educational challenges. So, yes, and you remember your
Yes. Before we go away, when we talk about what's in pathways to graduation,
yes,
while we did talk about AP courses and what folks have, students with disabilities have a number of graduation options now that they didn't have in years before. And so our ability to, one, give support in our alternative assessments, the job support that will be connected to the CDOS, and any of those other supports that buildings might need in order to get students on the pathway. Don't include the things that I was talking about that are not related services. So your job coaches, your folks in the building to be able to do those things, to get them out into the community in order to get the kinds of credits and the things that they need in order to obtain those different types of certificates.
The Regents is very much engaged in looking at additional alternative pathways, particularly potentially portfolio standard. I don't want to speak for them, but they're certainly looking at improvements to the pathways to graduation to provide more flexibility. I think, is that fair to say?
Yes. No, they have made their.
But no, they're now looking at even more.
Oh,
Okay. So, yes, last comments before we shut it down, yes.
Sure, yes. You started with questions about how we can change the foundation.
Yeah.
There are still some things we haven't really gotten to.
Okay.
There are some artificial floors and ceilings in the formula, especially with IWI and CWR. If we could eliminate those, it provides better equity for what's going on for districts. If we could look at stratification of regional cost indexes, and we've got places like Dundee and Red Creek, which are very small rural districts, compared to Brighton, the same Finger Lakes region. So we need to take a look at how those regional cost indexes are appropriately or inappropriately grouping districts together. Some other pieces we could take a look at are moving to a selected CWR. Currently, the CWR weights property value equal to income. If we could look at 70-30, 30-70, so look at some other selected pieces for that might help some districts and provide better equity. And the last two would be increasing the adjusted foundation aid amount to a more realistic current value than the old formula, and running high tax aid, right? High tax aid for some districts has been frozen. If you could unfreeze that could provide some relief for some districts.
So I'm sorry to rush on the very essential part, I didn't mean to make you do
That's
it.
okay.
Those are very helpful, I hope our staff here understand those.
I got something I can pass on.
And you can email us some more of that, and that's just in the weeds thing. So, do you want to, have you any more comments? want to say something?
Oh, this is your work, wasn't it?
Well, I was pulling down because I think we got a lot, we heard a lot, in my opinion. A lot of it is constructive on issues, a lot of it goes beyond. I understand, they're all connected, and we recognize that, but I appreciate that people really try to steer us in a direction that gives us some of the tools that we want to going forward.
I just want to thank you all. Thanks, Senator Mayor, for bringing this show on the road here to Central New York, because clearly there are a lot of voices that need to be heard here, and though the stories are kind of similar around the state, there are specifics, I think, that are really important to bring into the equation. I'm always blown away when I come to events like this at the passion and commitment and the amount of time that people are spending really trying to make sure that things are done right for our kids. And you all deserve a lot of credit for that, coming from all the different, whether you're a teacher or a principal or a parent advocate or all the different ways that people are bringing that passion. So I appreciate that deeply, and I once again want to thank my staff who are really working hard in this church, able to be heard and comfortable. I hope the folks who were in City Hall Commons were able to hear what was going on, and I hope that they will weigh in and if they have questions or something to me, I can always forward them on to Senator Mayer and the rest of the Education Committee. And otherwise, just thank you all for being here.
I'll be very quick. I'll echo Senator May's words. I too, I'm so impressed. Our community really is in good hands because of you all in this room, your passion and dedication. I have nothing but admiration for it. I know it's not easy, and hopefully we can help in the long run. I'll leave you with this, Donna. I think it was the BlackBerry in 2000. If we're still using metrics from 2000, I think iPhone wasn't even invented. But again, have a wonderful day, and thank you again for all your hard work.
No, just thank you. I think we got a lot of good ideas, good information. You folks really know the system and know what needs to happen, and hopefully we can do something. So thank you. And thanks for Regent Odeker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Regent.
I want to say yes,
I happen to have a few business cards left from the last box. But if anybody wants to connect with me, I am co-chair of the State Aid Committee for the Board of Regents. We're working like crazy right now, getting out, listening to people, talking with people. And I've had a lot of opportunities for that in the last couple of weeks. And your input is incredibly important to us. We have our priorities, but we want the priorities to be in the best interest of kids, which I've heard said here. I know I shouldn't use the word kids, but been around too long to change now, I guess. But thank you, I'm so glad I was here today. This was really stimulating conversation. We haven't solved anything yet, but we can keep working together, and I'm trying to reach out to people in other parts of the state so we make sure that everybody feels they've been spoken for.
And if people do want to submit additional comments in writing or email, George is my committee director, we of course feel free, we'll do our best to be as responsive as we can. And maybe we'll stop at come to my
Steve, take care, so you bring home.